The story begins with Vakir van Baskerville, once a loyal hound of the Baskerville family, now kneeling before a guillotine. Betrayed and falsely accused of colluding with the Demon Clan, Vakir faced execution. As the blade hovered over him, he vowed that if given another chance, he would never live as a submissive hound again. To his astonishment, Vakir awoke moments later, not in the afterlife, but in the fragile body of an infant. Disoriented and weighed down by his tiny form, he found himself surrounded by the wails of other babies. It didn't take long for Vakir to realize he was in the Baskerville family nursery. This was no ordinary rebirth. Hugo Le Baskerville, the family patriarch, entered the nursery to inspect the newborns. Cold and unfeeling, he dismissed the other crying infants as worthless. However, when his gaze landed on Vakir, who remained eerily quiet, Hugo's interest was piqued. He ordered Vakir to be moved to the infamous Cradle of Swords, a trial meant to test and shape Baskerville heirs. Vakir, carried to the cradle, locked eyes with Hugo, his hatred burning brighter than ever. It was clear to him now. Hugo was the architect of his downfall in his previous life. As the memories of his past life rushed back, Vakir realized the full scope of his predicament. Born to an illegitimate branch of the family, he had been subjected to brutal training in miserable conditions. Despite his unwavering loyalty and willingness to dirty his hands for the family's sake, he had been repaid with betrayal and execution, all because he knew too much. But this time, Vakir swore things would be different. No longer would he bow to Hugo or his family's whims. Revenge burned in his heart, but as an infant, he knew his power was limited. For now, his focus would be on survival and strength. The Cradle of Swords provided a rare opportunity. This brutal trial was a rite of passage for Baskerville children, who were thrown into a labyrinth of blades. Their goal was to reach the Styx River, a legendary waterway said to temper their bodies into iron. However, the river's transformative power was finite, and only the first to reach it could fully benefit. With memories of his past life fueling his determination, Vakir entered the maze. He recalled how his siblings had once sabotaged him, ensuring he missed the river's blessing. Not this time. Crawling through the razor-sharp labyrinth, he pushed forward, ignoring the pain that tore through his small body. His resolve paid off. He tumbled into the Styx River. The water seeped into his wounds, saturating his bones and flesh with excruciating agony. Yet, Vakir endured. This pain was nothing compared to what he had suffered in his past life. The longer he stayed submerged, the more his body absorbed the river's legendary strength. Outside the maze, his attendants grew frantic, begging him to surface before the river claimed his life. Meanwhile, Hugo observed with an air of amusement. He asked John Barrymore, the family's butler, how long Vakir had been in the water. When informed it had been 7 minutes, Hugo chuckled darkly, commenting that the boy might not survive. The attendants pleaded with Hugo to intervene, but the patriarch merely watched, his gaze a mix of curiosity and expectation. Hugo called out to Vakir, signaling that it was time to leave the river. But Vakir paid no attention. He was too focused on absorbing every drop of the Styx River's power. To him, this was an opportunity too rare to abandon. Even as the water began to fill his lungs and his strength waned, he repeated a single mantra in his mind. Endure, endure, endure. His body was at its limit, and it seemed as though he might drown, but he refused to surrender. Just as his consciousness began to fade, Hugo pulled him out of the water. The patriarch's smug smile betrayed a mix of amusement and satisfaction. He mockingly commented on Vakir's greed, noting how the boy had even tried to drink the river's water. As he examined the child more closely, Hugo noticed something unusual. Vakir already had teeth, an extraordinary development for a newborn. Intrigued, Hugo asked the head butler for the child's name. Upon hearing it, Hugo smirked and mused aloud. A very greedy son has been born. Though still groggy and weak, Vakir's mind remained sharp. He resolved that he would use this time to grow stronger in secret. Someday, with his own hands, he would tear his so-called master apart. His hatred burned not only for Hugo, but for the entire Baskerville family. He swore to make them vanish into history, just as they had tried to erase him. Vakir's mind drifted momentarily to the truth of his past life. He had been born as the bastard son of Hugo Le Baskerville, a prominent noble. Despite possessing extraordinary intelligence from a young age, his illegitimate status had relegated him to insignificance within the family. To prove his worth, he ventured into the perilous arts of assassination, espionage, and conquest, earning renown by the time he was 20. Yet, in the eyes of the Baskerville family, he was never more than a tool. At 30, his life took a darker turn when the gates of the demonic realm opened, unleashing a devastating invasion. Vikir fought valiantly for 5 years, becoming a pillar of humanity's resistance. When the war finally ended in victory, he expected recognition for his sacrifices. Instead, he was met with accusations and betrayal, ultimately leading to his execution. But this time, he vowed things would end differently. As Vikir awoke fully, lying in the nursery, he realized he had successfully absorbed the power of the Styx River. This achievement gave him a significant advantage, a stronger starting point than he'd had in his previous life. However, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door opening. A maid entered the room, seemingly startled to see him awake. She muttered to herself about an unusual request from Madame to place something on Vikir's bed. This piqued Vikir's curiosity. A gift? From someone in the Baskerville family? The thought was absurd. He was an illegitimate child, hardly deserving of any favor. The maid left, leaving behind a small box. As the lid creaked open, Vikir's curiosity turned to shock. 2 venomous mambas slithered out, their crimson eyes fixed on him. It didn't take long for Vikir to deduce the intent behind this gift. One of the few women in the Baskerville family addressed as Madam had sent these snakes, likely to eliminate him. The reason was simple: competition. If the snake succeeded, not only would Vikir be gone, but the other infants in the nursery could also fall victim to their lethal fangs. Vikir's hatred boiled over as he caught the venomous mambas with his bare hands, their writhing forms no match for his cold determination. Filled with rage, he thought of how he would one day bring down the entire Baskerville family with his own 2 hands. By morning, the scene in the nursery shocked the Baskerville household. The young child lay peacefully asleep, the 2 mambas lifeless beside him. Panic swept through the manor, and suspicion ran high. The nannies who had been on duty that night were subjected to brutal interrogations and executed for failing their responsibilities. Despite the chaos, the reason for the Viper's appearance remained a mystery to all, except Vikir. Only he knew the truth. 8 years passed, and Vikir sat in a classroom, his mind wandering as his teacher lectured on the hierarchy of swordsmanship. The instructor explained the stages. A sword beginner could not yet imbue their blade with mana. A sword expert could infuse their blade with a small amount. At the sword graduate level, the blade emitted a liquid-like aura of mana. Finally, at the pinnacle of mastery, the sword master could form and shape solid mana freely. The students gasped in awe upon hearing that Sir Hugo, the strongest of the Baskerville family, had achieved the rank of swordmaster. Yet Vikir, lost in thought, barely noticed their astonishment. He focused instead on regaining the immense power he had held before his regression. His coming-of-age ceremony loomed on the horizon, and he knew time was of the essence. The teacher, noticing Vikir's distracted demeanor, viewed him with admiration. Vikir's strong physique, forged by his unparalleled endurance in the Styx River as a baby, had not gone unnoticed. The teacher believed the patriarch Hugo would be pleased with his progress, though Vikir's thoughts were elsewhere. He silently calculated how many years it would take before he could kill Hugo and exact his revenge. After class, Vikir was confronted by 3 boys, triplets who exuded arrogance and malice. They pushed him, mocking him cruelly. They sneered, calling him garbage van and jeering about the rumors of his legendary feats as a baby, his time in the Styx River, and his strangling of the Mambas. Vikir recognized them instantly. These were Hugo's infamous trident: Highborough Le Baskerville, Middleborough Le Baskerville, and Lowborough Le Baskerville. The same triplets who had once betrayed and stabbed him during his flight from the family's false accusations in his previous life. All 3 were 9 years old, full of youthful bravado but devoid of wisdom. Their taunts continued, but Vikir's mind was calculating. He knew these boys would grow into dangerous opponents in the future, and he considered whether it might be prudent to deal with them now. The triplets' leader brandished a knife, smirking as he referenced the legend that staying in the Styx River made one's body impervious to blades. With mockery dripping from his voice, he ordered one of his brothers to grab Vikir. One of the triplets held Vikir from behind, covering his mouth. "Let's see if the rumors are true," he sneered. "If he can endure this for 3 minutes, I'll eat my hand." The others laughed in agreement, eager to test the claim. What followed left the triplets stunned. 1 minute passed, then 3. then 10. Despite their attempts to harm him, Vikir remained completely unharmed. The knife could not pierce his skin. Frustrated and bored, they released him, muttering about how the legend was real. As the triplet who had been holding Vikir let him go, he noticed blood on his hand and his missing finger. Shocked, he looked to Vikir, who casually spat the severed digit onto the ground. "What are you doing?" the boy stammered, his face pale. Vikir's response was calm, his smile dark. He reminded the triplet of his earlier promise. "You said you'd eat your own hand." The other two triplets, panicking, tried to de-escalate the situation. "Let's find a priest," they cried, hoping to reattach the finger. But Vikir wasn't interested. Instead, he calmly demanded they leave. The triplet, enraged and desperate, lunged at Vikir with a knife, shouting insults and emphasizing their age advantage. Vikir, calm and unmoving, allowed the blade to strike him. But to the triplet's shock, it didn't even pierce his skin. Seizing the moment, Vikir twisted the boy's wrist mercilessly, forcing him to cry out in pain. With a cold, menacing tone, Vikir reminded them that in the Baskerville family, power and talent always overshadowed something as trivial as age. An evil glint in his eye, Vikir taunted the triplets, suggesting they continue their game until its bitter conclusion. The first triplet's cries grew louder as Vikir twisted his arm further. Terrified, the other two watched, frozen in place. But their paralysis didn't last. One of the remaining triplets charged Vikir in a blind fury, only to be met with a devastating punch that sent him sprawling to the ground. The third, unable to contain his rage, lunged as well. Vikir swiftly countered with a kick to the face, knocking him down as effortlessly as the others. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the pained groans of the triplets. Vikir stood over them, his gaze icy and unforgiving. He told them with chilling detachment that while their wounds could heal with treatment, they would have to endure the pain of their battered bodies for now. However, he offered them a grim reprieve. One of them could leave the room. Relief flashed across the triplets' faces, and they quickly asked which one of them could go. In response, Vikir picked up a knife, tossing it on the ground in front of them. "Decide for yourselves," he said, his voice laced with mocking amusement. As he turned to leave, he issued a final, taunting remark. "Don't take too long. At least one of you should live, right?" The triplets stared at the knife, then at each other, realization dawning that survival would come at a cost. Desperation took over, and they began to fight, each struggling to claim the blade. The sounds of their conflict, grunts, shouts, and cries, echoed through the room. From outside, Vikir listened with satisfaction, knowing he had successfully driven a wedge between the once united trident of Baskerville. Meanwhile, in the Patriarch's office, the head butler, John Barrymore, delivered troubling news to Hugo Le Baskerville. The Morgue clan had been causing disturbances at the Ruby Mines, staking a claim to the territory. Hugo, unfazed, assured John they would deal with the matter when the clan made contact. John then shifted topics, reporting on the juvenile evaluations at the Baskerville Fortress. He informed Hugo that Master Vikir had achieved the highest score in the written exams. With the practical exams scheduled to take place in 5 days, the Guardian Knights had cleared the area in preparation. Hesitating slightly, John finally broached a more delicate subject, an incident involving the young masters. Hugo's expression darkened, and he asked how many had died. John reassured him that there were no fatalities, but detailed the injuries instead. Master Highborough's teeth had been completely shattered, Master Middleborough's jaw was broken, and Master Lowborough had lost his left index finger. While the injuries had been treated, the psychological scars on the boys seemed far deeper. Surprised, Hugo remarked that the Trident of Baskerville, known for their close bond, wouldn't have fought among themselves without a significant reason. John revealed that the friction stemmed from an encounter with another young master, an 8-year-old named Vikir. Not only had Vikir inflicted the injuries, but he was also the highest scorer on the written exam. Hugo, intrigued and slightly concerned, ordered Vikir to be summoned to his office. Vikir entered Hugo's office with a calm smile, giving off an air of quiet confidence. The Patriarch greeted him, remarking on how much he had grown since their last encounter. However, Hugo wasted no time addressing the matter at hand, the incident with the triplets, who were now both physically and emotionally scarred. Hugo pointed out that while their physical injuries had healed with proper treatment, the wounds inflicted on their bond as brothers were far more severe. With a steady voice, Hugo asked Vikir if he thought his actions had been wrong. Vikir, unflinching, responded with a question of his own. What did I do wrong? This answer made Hugo narrow his eyes slightly, as he elaborated that Vikir had turned his brothers into a complete mess. Yet Vikir's crimson gaze remained unwavering. He replied confidently, asserting that strength was what mattered most. And how could the stronger party ever be in the wrong? Hugo paused before revealing that, surprisingly, the triplets had already forgiven Vikir. The news caught Vikir off guard, and he asked, "They forgave me?" At that moment, an old memory surfaced in his mind, a scene from his past life. A young woman, the last surviving member of a family destroyed by the Baskerville clan, had come to Hugo as a nun. Despite the pain inflicted on her family, she forgave him, citing her faith. Hugo's cold response to her echoed in Vikir's mind. Forgiveness is merely an excuse for the weak, who lack the strength to seek revenge. Drawing from this memory, Vikir repeated the same sentiment to Hugo now, stating that forgiveness was nothing more than a way for the powerless to cope with their inability to retaliate. Hugo's stern expression softened into approval, his eyes glowing faintly as he nodded at Vikir's philosophy. Without a hint of disapproval, Hugo turned to his head butler, John Barrymore, instructing him to allow Vikir to take whatever snacks he wanted from the food storage, so long as he could carry them himself. Grateful, Vikir made a simple request: chocolates. As he turned to leave with the butler, Hugo addressed him one last time, calling him son and urging him to perform well in the upcoming evaluation, particularly against the direct descendants of the Baskerville bloodline. Vikir acknowledged the advice with a nod, but his face betrayed his lingering hatred. As Vikir and Barrymore arrived at the storage room, the butler began explaining the premium quality of the chocolate available, noting that the Moore clan had gone to great lengths to procure it. The chocolate was highly prized, even among noble circles. However, Vikir interrupted him, his tone firm, and said he didn't want anything processed. The head butler, momentarily taken aback, sought clarification. Vikir clarified that he wanted cacao beans, specifically ones with a rich aroma. Though perplexed, Barrymore complied, having the beans brought to Vikir. As Vikir placed one in his mouth, a nearby chef explained that the beans were bloody beans, renowned for their potent aroma and extraordinary yield. Just one bean could produce up to 100 liters of chocolate. The head butler watched in bemusement as Vikir chewed the bitter bean without hesitation. Barrymore assumed Vikir had an unusual love for chocolate, thinking this unorthodox approach was a means to secure more of it in the future. The chef offered to process the beans and deliver the finished product to Vikir's room, but Vikir declined, insisting on taking the raw beans with him. His peculiar request left the staff scratching their heads, unsure of his intentions. What no one realized was that Vikir had no interest in eating the chocolate. He had a far more devious plan for the cacao beans, one that would play a pivotal role in the practical exam in just 5 days. Unbeknownst to anyone, the seeds of chaos had already been planted, and a catastrophic event loomed, one that would go down in history as a defining moment for the Baskerville clan. The Baskerville family, infamously known as the Berserker family, has earned its reputation through the brutal training and evaluations imposed on its children. From the moment they take their first steps, their lives are shaped by grueling tests designed to push their limits. One of the earliest challenges requires them to climb a steep mountain without rest, save for carefully allocated breaks. When night falls, rest is no reprieve. They must sleep alongside the corpse of a monster to steel their nerves against fear and prepare them for hostile environments. This unrelenting regimen produces warriors who are both feared and respected, but it is at the age of 8 that the true trial begins, the deadly evaluation. This rite of passage defines the Baskerville family's legacy and their iron grip on the land's respect. On the outskirts of Baskerville territory looms Le Rouge Edel Noir Mountain, a treacherous peak teeming with monsters. It is here that the young hounds, those undergoing the evaluation, gather for their test. Shadow Dog Pavlov van Baskerville, an instructor renowned for his sharp instincts and formidable presence, stood before the group of eager but wary young masters to explain the rules of the exam. The task was simple but merciless. Survive for a month on the mountain while hunting large and strong monsters. The scoring system, however, added layers of strategy and danger. Survivors earned 10 points, with an additional 30 points if they avoided any permanent injuries. Felling another contestant earned 50 points, while defeating a monster added 70 points. Fulfilling all these conditions garnered 90 points, but no one could achieve a perfect 100. Sir Hugo's decree served as a reminder that a swordsman who becomes arrogant is destined to fall. Additional points could also be earned by stealing the badge issued to each participant, but death meant 0 points. A grim but clear ultimatum. Shadow Dog Pavlov cautioned against leaving the designated area, warning of the uncharted and dangerous terrain within the restricted parts of Le Rouge Edel Noir Mountain. While the monsters in the designated area had been subjugated to some extent, the mountain's forbidden zones held untold dangers. Shadow Dogs, acting as both examiners and covert supervisors, would be monitoring the candidates, grading their actions while attempting to minimize casualties. Though killing was not prohibited, it carried a penalty, and the instructors aimed to prevent unnecessary deaths. As the young masters awaited the bell, signaling the start of the test, whispers rippled through the group. Many cast glances at Vakir, murmuring about his past feats, his legendary endurance in the Styx River, and the rumored incidents involving the triplets. Vakir remained calm, his expression composed, while his thoughts lingered on the mountain itself. He had been to Le Rouge Edel Noir before and was no stranger to its challenges. Meanwhile, the triplets stood nearby, visibly nervous. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as they glanced uneasily at Vakir, clearly unsettled by his presence. Shadow Dog Pavlov offered a final wish for their success before the bell rang. The sound echoed through the mountain, marking the official start of the evaluation. Immediately, the young masters scattered in all directions, each seeking an advantageous position. Some acted on preconceived strategies, heading for areas they believed would give them an edge. Others opted for opportunism, following their peers with plans to claim their positions, or their badges, when the time was right. Among them, the triplets quarreled, each insisting on their own approach to dominate the exam. Their infighting slowed them down, making their movements erratic. Shadow Dog Pavlov, observing from a hidden vantage point, noted their bickering with a grim expression. Though he hoped to keep casualties low, the disarray among the young masters hinted at the chaos to come. One shadow dog, tasked with monitoring Vakir, watched him curiously. While most contestants were scrambling for safe zones within the designated area, Vakir took a different path, entirely heading straight for the restricted zone. The shadow dog was startled, both by the audacity of the decision and by the realization of who Vakir was. Rumored to be a genius since childhood, Vakir had distinguished himself time and time again. Intrigued, the shadow dog followed silently, eager to see how this exceptional young hound would fare against the mountain's uncharted dangers. Vakir approached a large tree, carefully observing his surroundings. The soft ground seemed like an ideal spot to set up camp for a while. He decided to rest, a choice that puzzled the shadow dog who had been tailing him. While the other participants were busy fighting monsters or stealing points from each other, Vakir focused on more mundane tasks, gathering wood, digging small holes, and practicing with a wooden stick. At night, he slept peacefully under the tree, completely unconcerned about the chaos unfolding elsewhere on the mountain. The shadow dog grew increasingly impatient. He began to question Vakir's strategy, wondering if the so-called genius was simply avoiding the competition rather than participating. To the shadow dog, Vakir appeared more interested in camping and preparing meals than earning points. Frustrated, the shadow dog eventually decided to abandon his post and look for more exciting candidates to observe. As soon as the shadow dog left, Vakir's expression shifted into a sly smile. He had been waiting for this moment. Without the watchful eyes of his follower, he could finally relax and focus on his real plan. Tossing a few bloody beans into the fire, Vakir mused about the old days when camping like this was routine. He chuckled softly, remarking to himself that the interfering shadow dog was finally gone, and he had completed his preparations. The real hunt could now begin. A few days later, Vakir ventured into the restricted area, a dangerous zone he recognized from his past life. He scouted the terrain, his eyes scanning for signs of his quarry. The smell of burning filled the air, a telltale sign that he was close. As he moved deeper, he noticed scorched tree roots and, finally, burning stool. The sight confirmed what he already suspected. His target was nearby. Towering before him stood a hellhound, a monstrous beast with flames spewing from its mouth and eyes. The creature was a nightmare given form, standing 3 meters tall and radiating sulfuric heat. Its flames could ignite anything, and once its victims caught fire, they would burn until completely reduced to ash. With a risk rating of B+, the hellhound was a living disaster, capable of wreaking havoc wherever it went. For a moment, Vakir's confidence wavered. In his past life, he had barely survived an encounter with one of these beasts at the age of 18. Now, as an 8-year-old, He knew facing the Hellhound directly was suicide. But he wasn't here to fight the beast head-on. He had a plan. As the Hellhound lunged toward him, flames flaring wildly, Vikir dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its bite. He recalled its first critical weakness. Hellhounds could only move in straight lines. Their massive bodies and incredible speed made sudden changes in direction nearly impossible. Quickly, Vikir poured water onto the ground, creating a shallow puddle. The Hellhound, charging at full speed, hesitated, forced to take a longer route to avoid the water. Vikir smirked, shouting out the Hellhound's second weakness. Like all canine monsters, it was unable to cross water, even at shallow depths. This bought him precious time to reposition himself. Despite the advantage, Vikir knew he wasn't out of danger. The Hellhound was relentless, its movements driven by bloodlust. As it lunged toward him again, Vikir executed the final step of his plan. He hurled a bloody beam directly into the beast's open mouth as it roared. The Hellhound began to whimper, its body trembling as it collapsed to the ground, unable to move. Vikir smirked, explaining to himself that chocolate was toxic to canines. And the bloody bean, capable of producing 100 liters of chocolate from a single seed, acted like a concentrated poison for the Hellhound. With the beast immobilized, Vikir drew his sword and aimed for its weak spot, the area near its kidney where no ribs offered protection. With a swift and decisive strike, he plunged his blade into the Hellhound's vulnerable side, ending its life instantly. As the Hellhound's energy, or karma, flowed into him, Vikir felt his body grow stronger. His sword felt lighter in his hands, and he could sense himself getting closer to reclaiming the power he'd held before his regression, all while being just an 8-year-old child. Standing over the fallen Hellhound, Vikir allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He imagined the look on Hugo's face when he returned to the clan with the head of a B+ rank monster. Cutting off the Hellhound's head as proof of his kill, he felt assured that he had already secured first place in the practical exam. But his triumph was short-lived. A low growl broke the silence, and Vikir turned to see a group of Hellhounds approaching, their flaming eyes fixed on him. It was clear they had come seeking revenge for their fallen comrade. Despite the odds, Vikir remained calm. He knew their weaknesses well and had enough bloody beans to turn the situation to his advantage. Gripping his sword tightly, he prepared to face them. Before the Hellhounds could strike, however, they suddenly began to whimper, shrinking back in fear. This reaction immediately caught Vikir's attention. Hellhounds were infamous for their relentless aggression and never backed down, even when facing death. Something had terrified them far more than Vikir's bloodlust. Turning around, Vikir's eyes widened as he saw the source of their fear. Towering before him stood a monstrous, three-headed creature, Cerberus, the legendary guardian of the underworld from Greek mythology. The beast was massive, at least 7 meters tall, and radiated an aura of unmatched menace. With a risk rating of A+, Cerberus was a creature of unparalleled power, far beyond the Hellhounds Vikir had just faced. Vikir's mind raced. What is a Cerberus doing here? These monsters typically resided on the 7th ridge of Le Rouge Edel Noir Mountain, far from the designated area of the exam. But as he observed the creature more closely, he noticed something critical. Cerberus was bleeding. Multiple arrows were lodged in its massive body, and its movements were slower than usual. It was clear that someone or something had been hunting it, driving it to this lower ridge. Realizing the opportunity before him, Vikir quickly assessed the situation. Despite its legendary strength, an injured Cerberus was far more manageable. He decided to attack. Drawing his sword, Vikir charged forward, channeling all his expertise into the fight. His body, strengthened by the Styx River, moved with precision and agility, and his weapons, carefully chosen for this exam, proved effective even against the mighty beast. Landing several strikes on the Cerberus, Vikir's confidence grew. He relied on the swordsmanship he had honed through countless battles against the demon clans in his past life. With each hit, he pushed the massive creature closer to defeat. An injured Cerberus. This is doable, he thought, determination blazing in his eyes. As the Cerberus roared in pain and lashed out, Vikir knew the battle was far from over, but his chances of killing the A+ rank monster seemed within reach. In a single moment of carelessness, Vikir found himself at the mercy of the Cerberus. With lightning-fast precision, the beast struck. The first swipe of its claws shattered Vikir's sword, sending fragments scattering to the ground. The second blow hit him with tremendous force, hurling him through the air like a rag doll. Vakir's flight ended abruptly as his body slammed into a tree trunk with a sickening thud. Blood poured from his mouth as he crumpled to the ground, motionless and battered. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Vakir's eyes fluttered open, panic rising within him as sharp pain radiated through his left arm. His first thought was that the Cerberus had torn the limb clean off, but to his relief, his arm was still attached, though badly injured. He grimaced, realizing that the magical properties of the Styx River likely saved him from complete devastation. Grateful for its protection, he reminded himself that even its blessing had limits. He wouldn't survive another direct hit. The Cerberus advanced again, its three heads snarling in unison. Vakir's survival instincts kicked in as he narrowly dodged its next strike. He knew that brute force wouldn't save him now. His years of hunting experience screamed at him to retreat, to find another way. Sometimes the best move was to live and fight another day. Swallowing his pride, Vakir turned and ran, his mind racing for a plan. As he sprinted, scanning the terrain for options, he spotted salvation, a weathered iron fence just a few yards ahead. If he could cross it, he'd be out of the restricted area and closer to the safe haven he'd prepared before this battle. Summoning every ounce of strength, he pushed himself forward, his feet pounding the ground as the Cerberus roared behind him. Reaching the fence, Vakir threw himself through the gate, barely making it to the other side. Relief surged through him, but he knew the fight wasn't over. He had to reach the next phase of his plan. Moving quickly, he scanned the woods, searching for his prepared trap. The sound of the Cerberus's pursuit drove him onward until he finally spotted it, a deep pit concealed beneath foliage. As the Cerberus lunged, its massive jaws snapping shut just behind him, Vakir dived out of the way. The beast fell into the pit, impaling itself on wooden spears hidden below. Vakir's lips curled into a smile. His preparation had paid off. Each spear had been coated with the essence of bloody beans, turning them into a deadly poison for canine monsters. The Cerberus howled in pain, its growls turning to wet gurgles as foam oozed from its mouths. But Vakir knew better than to lower his guard. The legendary beast was not defeated yet. It struggled to rise, its massive frame trembling with the effort, and began climbing out of the pit. Vakir grabbed a wooden spear, smeared with the venom of the bloody mamba snake, and hurled it with precision. The spear pierced the Cerberus's side, slowing its movements but not stopping it. The beast staggered forward, each step labored and pained. Vakir counted the steps silently, his heart pounding in his chest. 1 step, 2, 3. The Cerberus continued its approach. 4, 5, 6. As it took the 7th step, it faltered, its knees buckling. With a final, earth-shaking groan, the Cerberus collapsed, lifeless, at Vakir's feet. Vakir exhaled deeply, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The venomous spear, coated with the bloody mamba's poison, had worked just as the rumors said. No creature could take more than 7 steps after being struck by it. He had hidden the spear long ago, saving it for the day when he might need it most. That day had come, and it had ensured his survival. As the immense energy of the defeated Cerberus flowed into him, Vakir felt his body surge with newfound strength. Standing over the 3 lifeless heads of the legendary beast, he marveled at the power coursing through him. As Vakir stood over the lifeless Cerberus, his thoughts shifted from his hard-earned victory to a new, more pressing dilemma: how to transport the massive corpse. The sight of the beast's 3 severed heads alone would be enough to prove his feat, but the manner of its death, the poisoned spears, and the venomous fang's effects would be obvious to anyone examining it. He considered who might act as a witness to his triumph. Perhaps the guardian knight, who had seen him carving the wooden spears earlier, would vouch for him. However, a different thought sparked in Vakir's mind. The Cerberus was no ordinary monster. It was a gatekeeper. That meant one thing: it had been guarding something, most likely a dungeon. Vakir's pulse quickened as the possibility of hidden treasure came to him. Dungeons were often the lairs of powerful creatures, their depths filled with rare artifacts and untold riches. Determined to uncover what lay inside, he decided to investigate. Before entering the dungeon, Vakir took a calculated precaution. Scooping up a handful of the Cerberus's foul-smelling feces, he smeared it on his body. The odor would act as a deterrent to smaller monsters that might cross his path, masking his scent from predators. With his senses sharp and his resolve unwavering, He began tracking the Cerberus's trail through the forest. The path was clear to his experienced eyes. Dried soil, rotting leaves, and disturbed roots guided him back toward the source. As Vakir followed the trail, recognition dawned on him. This wasn't just any dungeon. It was one he had learned about in his past life. It would be discovered a decade from now, but by then, it would already have been looted, its treasures long gone. Right now, however, the dungeon felt alive with mana emanating from beneath the surface. It was a rare chance, one he couldn't pass up. Approaching the dungeon's entrance cautiously, Vakir noted the oppressive darkness within. The lack of light indicated that the dungeon was much deeper than he anticipated. Undeterred, his crimson eyes glowed faintly with excitement as he stepped inside. Each step echoed softly in the silence, heightening his anticipation of what lay ahead. The deeper Vakir ventured, the more wonders he encountered. Scattered throughout the dungeon were veins of ruby minerals, their faint glimmers illuminating the walls. He deduced that these veins were likely connected to the nearby Red All Mountain, a renowned source of precious gems. As he pressed forward, a glimmer of light appeared ahead, spurring him to quicken his pace. Soon, Vakir entered a brightly lit chamber that took his breath away. At its center stood a massive ruby mounted atop a stone pillar, radiating an intense, otherworldly glow. He could tell at a glance that the gem was infused with mana, its brilliance far beyond that of an ordinary jewel. The sight was mesmerizing, and for a moment he simply marveled at its beauty. But his awe was interrupted when he noticed something unsettling nearby. A skeleton lying crumpled on the ground. As he approached the remains, the signs of violence became apparent. The bones were fractured, with deep stab wounds visible in the brittle frame. Brown, dried blood stained the floor around it, indicating that the victim had perished long ago. Vakir knelt beside the skeleton, his sharp mind already piecing together clues. Lying beside the remains was a letter, its edges worn with age. Curiosity piqued. Vakir picked it up and began to read. The writer introduced himself as Kane, but he avoided staining the paper with his full name. As Vakir read further, his eyes narrowed in recognition. The handwriting was unmistakably that of a Baskerville. Could Kane have been a member of his family? The letter revealed a harrowing tale. Kane and his brother, Abel, had stumbled upon this legendary stone chamber, a place spoken of in Baskerville lore for generations. Together, they navigated countless trials and slew powerful monsters to reach this fabled location. But their journey ended here, where the final trial trapped them for 3 agonizing years. Vakir's mind churned as he took in the weight of their sacrifice. What treasure within this dungeon could possibly have been worth such suffering? Vakir's attention was drawn back to the magnificent ruby at the chamber's center. Its glow seemed to beckon him, and he realized it must be the key to unlocking the dungeon's final challenge. Approaching cautiously, he read the ominous riddle inscribed on the monument aloud. When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. The words were cryptic, and their meaning eluded him. He recalled from Kane's letter that both Kane and Abel had struggled with this very puzzle. The letter recounted their grim conclusion. As twins separated at birth, they believed the riddle required them to become one again. This interpretation had led to tragedy. Kane killed his own brother in a fierce battle, hoping their union in death would fulfill the riddle's condition. Yet even after Abel's death, the treasure remained inaccessible. Kane, racked with regret, left the dungeon empty-handed, warning future intruders of its cruelty. His letter described the dungeon as a devil's den, a place that preyed on human greed and ambition, offering nothing but despair. Vakir absorbed the account, his mind racing as he reread the riddle. Unlike Kane and Abel, he had no twin, and he felt certain the brothers had misunderstood the puzzle's true meaning. The words echoed in his head. When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. Vakir refused to succumb to despair. He was determined to succeed where Kane and Abel had failed. Examining the chamber closely, his sharp mind began piecing together the clues. His eyes lingered on the skeleton, a somber reminder of Kane and Abel's downfall, before shifting to the ruby at the center of the room. The riddle's phrasing, and its emphasis on 1 and 2, suddenly clicked. The answer wasn't about people. It was about shadows. Vakir strode toward the ruby, his thoughts aligning with clarity. The dark passageway leading into the chamber had cast only his shadowless form. Upon stepping into the ruby's light, however, he became 2. himself and the shadow created by the glowing gem. And when the light disappeared, the shadow would vanish, leaving only one again. Vakir didn't hesitate. Drawing his weapon, he struck the ruby with precision. The gem shattered into fragments, its dazzling light extinguished in an instant. A flash of brilliance illuminated the chamber as the ruby broke, revealing what the dungeon had been guarding. Vakir's breath caught as he laid eyes on the treasure hidden within. At the center of the newly revealed chamber stood a sword, exuding a sinister, otherworldly aura. It was embedded in a stone, as though waiting for its chosen wielder. The air around the weapon seemed heavy with malice, and its very presence radiated a palpable sense of dread. His gaze fell upon the inscription carved into the stone beneath the blade. "Only those with Baskerville's blood may claim me." Vakir's eyes widened in shock. This sword, brimming with demonic energy, was not just any weapon. It was the fabled Beelzebub. The name stirred long-buried memories from his childhood. He recalled an old picture book depicting the gluttonous fly, Beelzebub, a monstrous entity from ancient legends. The story spoke of Beelzebub as one of the 7 calamities, part of the devil's holy constellation. According to the tales, the 7 great families, including the Baskervilles, had risen to combat these cataclysmic entities, each family facing a fragment of their immense power. The first Baskerville patriarch had battled Beelzebub, sealing its remnants within the family's lands. Most dismissed these accounts as myths, but Vakir now knew the truth. The sword before him, imbued with Beelzebub's malevolent energy, was proof that the legends were real. The realization hit Vakir like a thunderclap. This weapon, steeped in demonic power, was both a symbol of his family's legacy and a harbinger of immense danger. Vakir's eyes remained fixed on the blade before him, recalling the blood-soaked history tied to its edge. This weapon, Beelzebub's sword, had once been wielded by the demon clans, leaving a trail of countless human deaths across battlefields. Determined to ensure it would never fall into their hands again, Vakir reached for the hilt, declaring, "This sword is mine now." As he grasped the hilt, an intense energy surged through his body, catching him off guard. With a gasp, he felt the blade respond to his touch, disappearing from sight only to reappear moments later, fused to his hand. Vakir marveled as the blade seemed to emerge directly from his palm, radiating a faint but ominous aura. Holding the blade in awe, Vakir realized this weapon was no ordinary relic. It was forged from the remains of a devil's holy constellation, and its potential filled him with anticipation. A grin spread across his face as he wondered how much stronger he could become in this life with such a weapon at his side. After thoroughly exploring the dungeon and confirming there was nothing else of value, Vakir decided to leave. But just as he approached the exit, a strange sensation overtook him. His vision blurred, his legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach in pain. At first, he thought it was his own hunger, but he soon realized the truth. It was the sword's hunger. Beelzebub's insatiable appetite was now linked to him. Stumbling out of the dungeon, Vakir felt the sword tugging at him, pulling him in a specific direction. Unable to resist its pull, he ran, following the blade's guidance. It led him back to the corpse of the hellhound he had slain earlier. Surprised, Vakir extended the sword toward the body, watching as Beelzebub absorbed the hellhound's blood with a voracious hunger. As the blade feasted, Vakir's own hunger subsided. He couldn't help but wonder if the blade's insatiable appetite had been responsible for the barren trees and dried soil on the mountain. After the sword finished feeding, it let out a satisfied sound, akin to a child finishing a meal. Vakir, however, felt a pang of frustration at the blade's unpredictable nature. Despite its immense power, wielding such a weapon would require careful management. He examined the blade more closely, noting its unique slots and the abilities it had absorbed. The sword's inherent ability, gluttonous flies, allowed it to absorb the skills of its opponents, making it a formidable weapon in battle. However, the nearly infinite capacity of this ability had left many of its past victims powerless and obsolete. Vakir knew the sword was dangerous, and he resolved to limit its consumption to 3 abilities at a time, no more. Inspecting the first slot, he found the skill Hemorrhage Hellhound, B+, absorbed from the hellhound's corpse. This ability would cause the blade to continuously pump out an opponent's blood through even the smallest wounds. It was a terrifyingly effective skill, perfect for attrition-based battles. Vakir's gaze shifted toward the Cerberus's massive corpse, an idea forming in his mind. He extended Beelzebub toward the body, allowing the blade to begin its work. However, Vikir stopped it before it could devour the entire corpse, warning that the remains needed to be intact for the upcoming autopsy. Lightly tapping the sword as if chastising a pet, he muttered, "Enough." The blade responded with a sharp cry, almost like a reprimanded child. Now, Beelzebub's 3 slots were filled. 1. Incinerate from Cerberus, A+. An ability to inflict severe, flaming injuries resistant to healing. 2. Hemorrhage from Hellhound, B+. A skill that exacerbates blood loss from even the smallest cuts. 3. High-speed regeneration from Brown Rat, F. A minor regeneration ability, likely from an unknown foe. Vikir was momentarily puzzled by the sudden acquisition of the high-speed regeneration ability until he noticed a crushed sewer rat under the massive Cerberus. Realizing that Beelzebub had absorbed the rat's skill alongside the others, he felt a mix of amusement and practicality. Though minor compared to the burn injury Cerberus or hemorrhage Hellhound skills, the regeneration ability could still prove useful. He also reflected on the incredible power of the Incinerate Cerberus ability, knowing that thermal injuries caused agonizing pain far worse than the effects of hemorrhage. With his preparations for the exam complete, Vikir decided to remain near the Cerberus's remains until the practical exam officially ended. When the young hounds returned to Baskerville, the clan elders began evaluating their performances. Each hound received a reward crafted from the remains of the monsters they had hunted, a sword, shield, or necklace symbolizing their success. However, one hound stood out from the rest, leaving an indelible impression on all who witnessed the evaluations. In his office, Patriarch Hugo Van Baskerville sat in his chair, eyebrows raised in surprise. Turning to his head butler, John Barrymore, he asked who caught what. Barrymore responded dutifully. Master Vikir Van Baskerville, the 8-year-old hound, hunted the Cerberus, a high-ranking A+ monster that accidentally wandered into the restricted area during the exam. Hugo's surprise deepened. Even the family's guardian knights often avoided facing such dangerous creatures, yet Vikir had managed to bring one down. Barrymore continued, explaining that the Cerberus had been wounded by the barbarian tribe before Vikir encountered it. The young hound had then applied poison to his wooden spear, ensuring the beast's defeat. However, the exact nature of the poison was unknown, and Vikir had provided no explanation in his hunting journal. When Hugo asked why Vikir hadn't clarified this detail, Barrymore noted that the boy had retired to his dorm, claiming he was tired. Amused, Hugo chuckled, remarking, "The little brat is already so sly. Information is power, and power has its value." Barrymore, still astonished, voiced his thoughts. "It's surprising that such talent comes from a hound named Van, rather than Lon." Hugo dismissed the implication of bloodline with a smirk. "I do not judge hounds by their lineage. I raise them for their talent and their spite. Even mutts can rise to greatness." His tone made it clear that in Baskerville, skill and ambition outweighed noble birth. Though Barrymore considered whether Hugo was worried about his second son, who was currently undergoing isolation training, he chose not to voice his speculation. Instead, he simply apologized for his earlier comment. Hugo waved it off, mentioning that he needed something to lift his spirits. Barrymore immediately offered to summon Vikir, which Hugo agreed to with a nod. When Vikir entered Hugo's office, he appeared composed and self-assured. Hugo wasted no time, questioning Vikir about his success in hunting the Cerberus. With calm precision, Vikir revealed that he had used chocolate as a poison, exploiting its lethal effect on canine monsters. The explanation left Hugo momentarily stunned. He quickly connected the dots, realizing that Vikir's earlier request for chocolate had been part of his strategy. Barrymore, standing nearby, was equally taken aback. However, his attention shifted to the unspoken tension between the two. The lack of formal greetings struck him as odd, leading him to wonder if this was truly the interaction of a father and son. The conversation continued, with Hugo inquiring why Vikir had refused to provide an explanation to Barrymore earlier. Vikir's response was curt but pointed. "The butler is not my master." Hugo raised an eyebrow and asked, "Then who is your master?" Without hesitation, Vikir replied, "I belong to the clan. The master of the clan is my master as well." Hugo smirked as he addressed Vikir, congratulating him on his exceptional performance during the practical exam. As a reward, Hugo declared that the Cerberus's corpse and all associated materials would belong solely to Vikir. Furthermore, as the highest scorer, Vikir was granted a special privilege, the chance to make a wish. Vikir's eyes lit up at the prospect. Without hesitation, He requested access to the 10,000 book library, one of the largest and most prestigious repositories of knowledge in the empire, located deep within the Baskerville clan's territory. The library was a bastion of forbidden techniques and secrets, accessible only to the patriarch, the second in command, and their direct descendants. Hugo's eyebrows rose at the unexpected request. He reminded Vikir of the strict rules governing access, making it clear that illegitimate children were not permitted entry. Undeterred, Vikir coolly replied that he would accept the decision if access was denied, though inwardly, he was already devising a plan to sneak in if necessary. To Vikir's astonishment, Hugo granted him permission, leaving him momentarily speechless. But Hugo didn't stop there. He instructed Vikir to specifically seek out the Baskerville 6 technique, located in the 6th restricted zone of the library, a place even legitimate children of the family rarely ventured. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on Vikir. No illegitimate child had ever been granted access beyond the 4th technique, much less the 6th. Though he kept his composure, his mind raced as he tried to discern Hugo's intentions. Why would he give me this opportunity? Even so, Vikir reminded himself that the 6th technique, while impressive, was still far below Hugo's own level. Before his regression, Hugo had mastered the Baskerville 7th technique and wielded the legendary power to bear 9 fangs. Vikir, however, had no intention of stopping at the 6th or even the 7th technique. His goal was clear: to surpass Hugo and claim the ultimate prize, the textbook of swordsmanship, containing the teachings of the first Baskerville patriarch who had subdued the 7 great disasters. This was the foundation of the clan's unparalleled legacy, and Vikir knew it held the key to his success. Hugo smiled faintly, wishing Vikir good luck. Bowing in gratitude, Vikir thanked him. Inside, he couldn't help but marvel at how Hugo had unknowingly handed him an opportunity of incalculable value. He doesn't realize what he's given me, Vikir thought. But it didn't matter. Vikir was determined to make the most of it and grow beyond all expectations. Arriving at the 10,000 book library for the first time, Vikir gazed around in awe. Towering shelves filled with ancient tomes stretched as far as the eye could see, their spines bearing names that ignited his imagination. He read some aloud, marveling at their evocative titles: Severing Incisors, Grinding Molars, Piercing Canines, Snaggletooth that embeds twice, Wisdom Teeth that lay down. These were the secrets of swordsmanship he had long coveted but had been barred from learning in his past life. Yet Vikir also understood the reasoning behind the restrictions. The Baskerville family had intentionally designed their techniques to prevent hounds, like him, from learning skills superior to the 4th technique. It was a safeguard, ensuring no hound could turn their fangs against their master. Despite these limitations, Vikir pressed on, his steps purposeful as he searched for his prize. Eventually, he arrived at a section guarded by chains. A massive book lay behind the iron bindings, its lock glinting in the dim light. He immediately knew this was it, the Baskerville 6 technique. Vikir couldn't believe it. Hugo had truly granted him access to a treasure he'd never dared to dream of in his previous life. As Vikir unlocked the chains around the book, he smirked, understanding why Hugo had allowed him access. Hugo likely believed an 8-year-old child couldn't possibly memorize the contents of the book in a single day. But Hugo underestimated him. Before his regression, Vikir had already studied the theories behind the 1st through 4th techniques extensively, so much so that he had grown sick of them. He had done this to deduce the elusive 5th technique, which he now understood had eluded him because of one critical oversight. After drawing the 4th tooth, he hadn't stopped the flow of mana. The Baskerville swordsmanship had a unique progression system. Each stage corresponded to a specific number of fang. The 1st technique involved 1 fang, the 2nd technique 2, and so on. With every new technique, a special trait emerged: the appearance of a distinct red sword energy. Despite the opportunity to read about the 6th technique, Vikir's focus wasn't on that book. He had come to the 10,000 book library for something far more significant, a way to surpass his current limitations entirely. Leaving the swordsmanship section, Vikir caught the guards off guard. They stared at him in disbelief, asking if he was already finished reading. One offered to retrieve more swordsmanship books for him, suggesting that he delve into the deeper sections of the library where the most valuable techniques were stored. But Vikir declined, assuring them that he had completed his task. The guards, amazed by how quickly he had finished, encouraged him to browse other sections. Vikir nodded politely and continued on his way, overhearing their whispered conversations. One guard speculated that Vakir didn't realize the worth of the deeper swordsmanship texts because of his age. Another suggested that if it were him, he would spend every moment studying the best techniques available. Vakir smirked to himself, letting the guards think what they wished. He knew exactly what he was doing. Among the dusty shelves of miscellaneous books lay the real treasure he sought. His crimson eyes scanned the rows until they landed on an unassuming, tattered book titled Lurking Embedded Teeth. Holding the book in his hands, Vakir appeared to be examining an insignificant, damaged text. Its ripped pages and mundane appearance suggested it was worthless, a forgotten relic gathering dust. But Vakir knew its true value. He remembered vividly the time before his regression when he was part of the Hound squad. During a mission, they had stumbled upon a single torn page from a swordsmanship textbook. The page bore the unmistakable handwriting of a Baskerville ancestor, and its cryptic contents hinted at a forgotten technique. The page had sent Hugo into an obsessive frenzy. Determined to find the original book, Hugo had scoured the library for years before finally locating it within Lurking Embedded Teeth. The book, hidden among piles of useless texts, contained the writings of the Baskerville ancestor and revealed the legendary 10th Fong technique. Hugo, captivated by its promise, declared war on anyone who held the missing pages. He dispatched hounds to the 7 great families to retrieve the remaining 6 pages, sacrificing countless lives in the process. Eventually, the pages were recovered, but the cost was horrific. The bodies of loyal hounds piled high, drenched in blood. For their unimaginable sacrifice, Hugo's only acknowledgement was a simple phrase: "Good job." The memory of this hollow reward enraged Vakir. The mission had propelled Hugo to master the 9th technique, but the price had been unbearable. Vakir's anger simmered as he reflected on the senseless waste of life. He vowed that history would not repeat itself. He would surpass Hugo, not by blindly following his methods, but by learning from his mistakes. He flipped through Lurking Embedded Teeth, knowing that without the missing pages, the book was little more than a collection of incomplete, disconnected techniques. Yet Vakir's advantage was clear. Before his regression, he had memorized every detail of those lost pages. He now realized the reason he couldn't progress beyond the 4th technique wasn't his skill or mana. It was the absence of this original text. The missing pages held the key to understanding the techniques in their entirety. As Vakir finished reading Lurking Embedded Teeth, he said aloud to himself, "To most, this book would seem like a collection of meaningless, disjointed nonsense. But when paired with the missing pages, the misleading information transforms into an absolute masterpiece." He marveled at the genius of the text, realizing its brilliance only fully emerged when the blanks were filled. Vakir had reached the pinnacle of graduate aura and the highest level of the 4th Fong technique before his regression, and now, with this knowledge, he was confident he could surpass it. However, this time, he vowed not to repeat the mistakes of his past. He promised himself that before he turned 15, he would reclaim all the power he had lost, and more. Engrossed in the book, Vakir lost track of time. When he finally closed it, the night had turned into day. The realization of how much he had achieved filled him with pride. He had memorized every word, every nuance of the text. Looking around, he noticed that the Guardian Knights were absent. The silence of the library emboldened him further. He couldn't yet draw all 10 teeth with his young body, but he felt sure that achieving the elusive 5th Fong technique, which had eluded him in his past life, was now within reach. Vakir approached a nearby statue and entered a state of unyielding focus. With determination in his heart, he began executing the Baskerville sword techniques, unleashing every ounce of power he could muster. First came the 1st Fong technique, then the 2nd Fong technique. The 3rd Fong technique followed, each strike more precise and forceful than the last. Finally, he unleashed the 4th Gang technique, a series of moves honed through years of dedication. As his sword struck the statue repeatedly, memories of his past life flooded his mind. He recalled the grueling work it had taken to achieve the highest level of graduate aura. Despite his immense potential, his illegitimate status barred him from learning the techniques that could elevate him further. The hostility of the Baskerville direct bloodline had ensured he never surpassed the 4th technique. But this time was different. Vakir was no longer shackled by his past. With every strike, he channeled his anger, frustration, and defiance into the blade. In his mind's eye, the statue became a vivid image of Hugo's face, taunting him. With a ferocious swing, he unleashed his full force, slicing through the statue with precise, calculated strikes. As the dust settled, Vakir stepped back, breathing heavily. His hands trembled with anticipation as he wondered if he had successfully performed the fifth technique. When a hot sensation surged from his heart to his neck, he knew the answer. A triumphant smile spread across his face, and he clenched his fists in exhilaration. He had done it. Vakir's emotions overwhelmed him. Tears nearly welled in his eyes as the magnitude of his success hit him. Suddenly, he noticed a sharp, tangible sign of his progress. His canine teeth had begun to grow. In the Baskerville clan, such a development symbolized a hound's readiness to draw their fangs toward their master. It was a moment of unprecedented achievement, one that had never occurred so early in the clan's history. As his body trembled with excitement, Vakir felt the strength of his mana surging within him. He marveled at the transformation of his aura. The solid state of his energy had evolved into a liquid form, denser and far more versatile. This new level of graduate aura allowed him to wield his power with unprecedented precision. In his previous life, it had taken him 30 grueling years to reach this stage. Now, at only 8 years old, he had accomplished the same feat. Vakir gazed at the flowing aura surrounding him, a testament to his newfound status. Graduates were leagues above sword experts, and the realization of his achievement filled him with both awe and confidence. But this was only the beginning. His attention turned back to lurking embedded teeth. He resolved to master its technique, a method that allowed seamless transitions between offense and defense. With its limitless potential, it was the perfect swordsmanship technique for someone with Vakir's ambition. Vakir carefully placed lurking embedded teeth near the window and took a moment to reflect on his journey so far. Since his regression, he had grown exponentially in strength and skill. He was confident that with his newfound abilities, he could take on a mid-class graduate or a swordsman and emerge victorious. However, Vakir knew he couldn't afford to reveal the full extent of his power. Not yet. He needed to give Hugo a reason to keep watching him, buying time to secure everything he needed. With a sly grin, Vakir pulled out a magnifying lens. Positioning it over the book, he allowed the sun's rays to converge, igniting the pages in a small, controlled fire. Watching the flames consume the text, he remarked that destroying the book would make it far more difficult for Hugo and the hounds to piece together the 10th Fong technique. For Vakir, however, it would pose no such problem. He had already memorized every crucial detail. Suddenly, the library guards burst into the room, alerted by the smell of burning paper. Startled to find Vakir there, they demanded an explanation. Vakir's expression shifted instantly to one of contrition, and he apologized profusely, claiming the fire had started when he accidentally left the magnifying glass too close to the book. He even offered to report the incident to the butlers himself. The guards, fearing punishment for neglecting their duties, hesitated. One finally suggested that Vakir bore no responsibility. It was their failure for not monitoring the area properly. They were just relieved that the fire occurred in a section filled with useless books. Vakir subtly steered the conversation, mentioning their preoccupation with the Morg clan and the Ruby mines, which might explain their absence. The guards nodded in agreement, promising to keep the incident a secret if Vakir did the same. As he left the library, Vakir apologized again for the trouble, thanking the guards for their understanding. Once out of sight, his face split into a mischievous grin. The guards' oblivious praise echoed behind him. They thought Vakir was thoughtful and considerate, someone deserving of respect. Vakir relished their naivety, knowing he had perfectly orchestrated the situation. Later, in Hugo's office, the patriarch leaned back in his chair and asked Vakir if he had learned anything enlightening from the library. Vakir replied cryptically, describing what he had learned as something warm, sharp, soft, and viscous. The answer caught both Hugo and the head butler off guard. They exchanged startled glances, realizing the implications. Vakir might have achieved aura. Aura was the hallmark of one's official entry into the world of the sword. Even the most gifted Baskerville hounds typically needed to train without rest until the age of 15 to achieve this milestone. Hugo, stunned, reminded himself that Vakir was only 8 years old. Denying the possibility, he asked Vakir to demonstrate what he had learned. Vakir agreed without hesitation. In a massive coliseum-like structure, Vakir stood in the center, sword in hand. Rows of young hounds gathered around, their faces filled with confusion and curiosity. The head butler leaned toward Hugo, asking how he planned to test Vakir's skills. Hugo's response was simple and shocking. He intended to release a monster. The butler's eyes widened in disbelief. Releasing a monster was unheard of for an 8-year-old, but Hugo confirmed his plan with a smirk, adding that the creature he had chosen was both hungry and feisty. Moments later, the gate before Vakir creaked open, and a guard led in a chained orc. The massive, green-skinned creature snarled as it entered the arena. Its bulging muscles rippled with barely contained rage, and razor-sharp tusks protruded from its mouth. Beady eyes darted around the Colosseum, sizing up its surroundings. The young hounds in the audience gasped in awe and disbelief as the fearsome orc roared, its chained muscles rippling with feral rage. Whispers spread like wildfire among them, questioning whether such a powerful creature was necessary to test an 8-year-old. Some murmured concerns about whether the Guardian Knights might have to intervene if things spiraled out of control. But while the crowd doubted, Vakir stood calm and composed, his sword steady in his grip. He was unshaken, his sharp eyes fixed on the orc as Hugo gave the order to release the chains. The orc let out a deafening roar and charged at Vakir, its massive bulk barreling forward with terrifying speed. Vakir waited, his body still and poised, timing his move perfectly. As the orc lunged, he swung his sword with blinding precision, slicing off the creature's arm in a single, fluid motion. The orc stumbled back, roaring in pain and shock, while the audience sat frozen in stunned silence. Without hesitation, Vakir followed up with another swift strike, severing the orc's leg cleanly. The monster collapsed to the ground, growling in agony. The audience couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. How could an 8-year-old hound display such skill and strength? Some muttered that it seemed impossible to achieve such precision without using mana. Meanwhile, Vakir stood composed, analyzing the situation. He noted that the orc appeared confused, as though it had never bled before. Vakir knew why. It wasn't just the severed limbs. The hemorrhage ability in his blade was preventing the orc's famed high-speed regeneration from activating. A C-class monster like the orc couldn't overcome the lingering effects of a B-class hellhound's curse. From the sidelines, Hugo watched intently, his face unreadable. Vakir met his father's gaze and recognized the look. Hugo wasn't simply evaluating the fight. He was trying to decipher what Vakir had learned in the library. Deciding to show his father what he was capable of, Vakir prepared for his final move. Hugo's eyes began to glow faintly, a sign of heightened interest. The head butler gasped, his voice trembling as he exclaimed, "That's an aura blade!" Before the orc could recover, Vakir's sword began to radiate a brilliant red light. Without hesitation, Vakir charged forward, his blade slicing cleanly through the air. With a single, devastating strike, he decapitated the orc. Its massive head tumbled to the ground as the red glow from Vakir's sword dissipated into the silence of the Colosseum. The audience erupted in astonishment. The young hounds could barely comprehend what they had witnessed. Even the head butler turned to Hugo, exclaiming, "It's the aura of a low-class sword expert. We've just witnessed the birth of a genius. There will never be another like him across all the families in the Empire." Despite the head butler's praise, Hugo's attention remained fixed on the pool of blood spreading beneath the orc's lifeless body. The creature's legendary regeneration had been completely nullified. He only won because the orc was weak, Hugo remarked, though his tone betrayed his intrigue. Before Hugo could say more, Vakir's calm voice interrupted him. With a polite but innocent smile, Vakir asked, "Is there anything stronger than this orc?" The audience collectively held their breath. An 8-year-old asking for a stronger opponent after defeating an orc? Even the young hounds who had doubted him moments earlier were now rendered speechless. Vakir had his reasons. He wanted to demonstrate his rapid progress, not just to Hugo, but to the entire clan. If he could prove himself in front of everyone, he hoped he might be acknowledged, perhaps even sent to a prestigious academy or dispatched to a remote area, away from Hugo's direct oversight. Hugo, observing his son with newfound curiosity, chuckled. "It seems the orcs I brought from afar are not enough to satisfy my son's hunger." He turned to the head butler, who stood nearby, and asked, "Do we have anything stronger? Something suitable from the creatures captured during the barbarian raid?" The head butler hesitated before replying. "There is one left, my lord." Hugo nodded, his smirk growing. "Bring it in." The Colosseum fell into a tense silence as the massive gate creaked open once more. Every pair of eyes was glued to the entrance as the ground trembled beneath heavy footsteps. The crowd gasped as a troll emerged, bound in chains. Vakir stood calmly in the arena, his gaze fixed on the towering troll before him, a creature twice his size, with rippling muscles and a fearsome presence. Seeking Hugo's approval to begin, Vikir nodded slightly when the patriarch gave the go-ahead. The chains binding the troll clattered to the ground, and the beast roared ferociously, lunging forward with a massive punch aimed directly at Vikir. But Vikir was too quick. With graceful agility, he sidestepped the attack, the troll's fist smashing into the ground with a thunderous impact. Swiftly moving behind the troll, Vikir exploited its momentary confusion. From the audience, a young hound exclaimed, "That's the perfect moment to attack. Why didn't he take it?" Hugo's voice cut through the murmurs, calm and instructive. Trolls have extraordinary regenerative abilities. Only fatal attacks are worth it. Anything less is a waste of effort. A proper plan is essential to hunt a troll. The troll charged again, its movements powerful yet sluggish. Vikir danced around its attacks with ease, evading every swing, swipe, and stomp. The audience watched in awe as the 8-year-old displayed remarkable poise, but their curiosity grew. Why wasn't he fighting back? Some speculated that he was tiring the troll out, while others whispered that Vikir must be waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. After several minutes of evasion, Vikir began to grow bored with the tedious exchange. He decided it was time to act. Fully aware that he could end the fight quickly with his true strength, Vikir deliberately chose a more calculated approach. He needed to ensure his victory seemed plausible, not overwhelming. As the troll launched another attack, Vikir seized the moment. With a precise swing, he sliced into the troll's arm, nearly severing it from its shoulder. Gasps filled the Colosseum as the audience momentarily believed the fight was over. However, their astonishment turned to unease as they watched the troll's arm begin to heal rapidly. Within moments, the severed tissue reconnected, and the limb was as good as new. Vikir frowned slightly. He had known the troll's regeneration would kick in, but the sight of it confirmed that the hemorrhage skill of Beelzebub was the only way to deal a lasting wound. However, he also knew he couldn't rely on such an obvious and revealing technique. Hugo, observing the fight with sharp eyes, called out, "Enough, Vikir. Stop before this gets out of hand." But Vikir's response was calm and resolute. "I'm almost done," he replied. "If I can't finish it with the next attack, I'll give up." The troll growled, its beady eyes glowing with rage as it prepared another charge. Vikir's mind raced. He knew exactly how much power he was willing to reveal, and the scenario he wanted to create. He would make it seem as though he'd had a sudden breakthrough, a leveling up moment during the heat of battle. Not only would this impress Hugo, but it would also allow him to conceal the true extent of his strength. The crimson glow of Vikir's sword brightened, its aura blazing like fire. As the troll lunged, Vikir met its attack head-on. With one clean, decisive strike, his blade sliced through the troll's neck, severing its head in a single motion. The massive creature's body collapsed with a deafening thud, its head rolling across the arena floor. The Colosseum fell silent, every pair of eyes wide with shock. Even the head butler, who rarely showed emotion, gasped audibly. "The second technique," the butler whispered, barely able to believe his own words. "He's achieved the second technique of the Baskerville clan at 8 years old. That's unheard of. Most don't reach this level until they're at least 18. In the center of the arena, Vikir stood with an innocent smile, as if unaware of the weight of his accomplishment. "I did it," he declared cheerfully. Hugo, however, remained seated, his expression unreadable. Inside, he was reeling. What he had just witnessed defied everything he knew about swordsmanship and training. An 8-year-old performing the second technique? The implications were staggering. A week later, Vikir sat in the Baskerville dining hall, staring at a bowl of unappetizing meat porridge. Around him, the atmosphere was tense. None of the other hounds dared approach him, avoiding his gaze entirely. This reaction didn't surprise Vikir. In the Baskerville family, power was everything, and his recent display had placed him far beyond the reach of his peers. As he ate, Vikir noted with satisfaction that even Hugo seemed unsettled by his performance. Reflecting on his progress, Vikir considered what he had revealed so far, his mastery of the second technique and his rank as a medium-ranked sword expert. Yet the truth remained hidden. He was, in fact, a low-ranked sword graduate who could weakly perform the fifth Fong technique. Vikir sat at the dining table, reflecting on the skill he had gained from the troll. Super speed regeneration with a C+ rating, now occupying Beelzebub's third slot. With it, he felt stronger than the average graduate or a swordsman. though he noticed his appetite had increased significantly since acquiring the ability. As he continued eating, his thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of the triplets behind him. Surprised and wary, Vikir turned cautiously. He had no interest in dealing with them again, so he returned to his food, hoping they would leave. However, the triplets quickly blurted out their reason for approaching him. They wanted to tell him how cool he was during his fights with the Cerberus and the troll. Vikir was so shocked by their unexpected praise that he spat out his porridge. The triplets, concerned, asked if he was okay, but Vikir remained suspicious, questioning their motives. Could this be some kind of two-faced technique? Or maybe a deceitful policy? He thought. For a brief moment, he considered beating them up preemptively, but decided to observe them further. Before he could act, the head butler, Barrymore, appeared behind him and called his name. Vikir turned in surprise, wondering what had brought the butler here. Barrymore informed him that the patriarch had summoned him to the office immediately. Intrigued, Vikir quickly finished his meal and made his way to Hugo's chambers. In the Baskerville patriarch's office, Hugo sat in his chair, exuding his usual air of authority. He greeted his visitor, Adolphe Morgue, the Morgue clan's patriarch by proxy. The Morgue clan, a renowned mage family, had a tense history with the Baskervilles, an iron-blooded sword clan. Despite their rivalry, they were bound by the Emperor's decree to conduct annual joint training sessions for children between the ages of 8 and 15. "It's been a while," Hugo said curtly. Adolphe nodded. "Indeed. I hope this year's event goes smoothly." Hugo's tone was casual. "The joint training has always been handled without issue." Adolphe raised an eyebrow. "Without issue? Last year, 2 children, one from each family, were seriously injured." Hugo waved the matter off dismissively. "A scratch. Nothing more. It seems the Morgue children are dramatic." Adolphe's lips twitched in irritation. "The Morgue children are noble and dignified, unlike some." His words dripped with subtle disdain. Once, the Baskervilles and Morgues had been on good terms. The past emperor himself had declared that magic and swords complemented each other, sparking cooperation between the two clans. But the discovery of a ruby mine along their shared border had changed everything. Bloodshed over the resource had soured their relationship, yet they continued the joint training sessions under imperial command. Adolphe had arrived on behalf of his brother to ensure this year's event proceeded without complications. Turning to Hugo, he commented, "I've heard there's a supernova in the Baskerville family. A rare genius born once in a century. A blessing to the Empire, no doubt." Hugo, though secretly pleased, downplayed the compliment. "It's nothing extraordinary." Adolphe smirked, detecting the subtle pride in Hugo's tone. "We, too, have a genius in our family," Adolphe said, gesturing toward the door. "Morgue clan head Raspine's daughter, Camus." The door opened, and a red-haired girl with a fiery demeanor entered the room. Adolphe introduced her formally to Hugo, but before Adolphe could continue, Camus interrupted. Fixing Hugo with an accusatory glare, she demanded, "Are you the thief who stole our ruby mine? Give it back." Hugo's face darkened, his calm demeanor giving way to a sharp glare directed at Adolphe. "Thief?" he asked coldly. "Is that what you're teaching your kin now?" Adolphe looked startled. "I never said such a thing." Camus was unfazed. She pointed an accusatory finger at him and replied, "You did. An hour and 42 minutes ago, right before we got off the carriage, you called him an annoying chin beard who stole the ruby mine." Hugo's glare deepened as Adolphe stammered, trying to deny the claim. "Camus, you must have misheard. I said no such thing." But Camus stood her ground. "You definitely said it." Hugo, still struggling to maintain his composure, demanded clarification from Adolphe. However, Adolphe attempted to defuse the situation, suggesting that Camus' accusations stemmed from a misunderstanding. But Hugo's patience wore thin. "There's no need to explain the Morgue clan's problems with children's education to me," he said, his voice laced with irritation. Camus, undeterred, persisted. She repeated her demand, complaining that her research was impossible without the stolen rubies. Adolphe tried to rein her in, calling her name in a warning tone, but she ignored him. Hugo's patience snapped. With barely concealed anger, he remarked, "It seems the Morgues don't teach manners at all." Adolphe bristled at the comment and retorted, "And what do you plan to do? Threaten an 8-year-old girl?" His words struck a nerve, leaving Hugo momentarily speechless. The proud Baskerville patriarch couldn't stoop to such behavior without tarnishing his dignity. Before the tension could escalate further, a calm but cutting voice broke through the heated exchange. "It seems the Morgues don't teach their children not to envy what belongs to others." The speaker was Vakir, who had just entered the room with the head butler. The butler formally announced Vakir's arrival as Hugo turned to see his son, standing with a composed demeanor. Adolphe, startled by Vakir's sudden appearance, quickly deduced that this boy must be the rumored Baskerville supernova. His thoughts were interrupted when he realized that Camus, who had been sitting beside him moments ago, was no longer there. Camus had moved swiftly, confronting Vakir directly. Her fiery disposition on full display, she demanded to know what he had just said. Adolphe called her name, trying to stop her from causing a scene, but Camus ignored him. Vakir, meanwhile, remained unruffled, studying her intently. As Vakir observed Camus, he recalled the stories of her future self, the Mord clan's legendary iron-blooded empress. Renowned as the genius of geniuses, Camus would one day rise to prominence, creating an era of unrivaled power for the Mord clan. She was infamous for her ferocity, having single-handedly eradicated the monsters and barbarians from Le Rouge Edel Noir Mountain, forming the infamous border of blood and ashes. Her political prowess would even allow her to manipulate the imperial family, earning her the moniker of Fire Goddess of Authority. But for now, Vakir reminded himself, Camus was just a child, a fiery and talented one, but still far from the legend she would become. Camus interrupted his musings, snapping, "Why does the ruby mine belong to you?" Remaining calm, Vakir countered her tantrum, calling her behavior childish. Camus bristled at the remark and began casting a spell. Vakir prepared himself for an attack, but was surprised when, instead, Camus conjured an intricate ice sculpture. She pointed at the sculpture and began explaining her point, her tone laced with defiance. Using the ice sculpture as a visual aid, Camus illustrated the contested geography of the ruby mine. She pointed to a small cave on the sculpture and explained, "This is the joint security area. The mine entrance lies within Mord territory, but the vein itself runs beneath Baskerville land. That prevents you from claiming it entirely, but it also makes it impossible for us to mine freely without crossing into Baskerville territory." She emphasized that the Mords had repeatedly offered to pay rent for the use of the land, but the Baskervilles had rejected every proposal. "The ruby vein belongs to the Mord clan," Camus declared, "but your people keep claiming we're trespassing and interfering with your operations." Adolphe nodded approvingly at Camus' explanation, while Hugo's expression darkened with mounting annoyance. Vakir, still calm, interjected, "Rubies are common magic ingredients. The Baskervilles don't need them." Camus turned to him, confused and visibly frustrated. "Then why not rent your land if you don't need the rubies?" Vakir explained calmly but firmly to Camus that the Baskervilles were fiercely protective of their land and uninterested in letting others profit from it. His warning was clear. Entering Baskerville territory would bring losses, not gains, for the Mord clan. Camus, however, refused to accept his reasoning. Determined to assert her claim, she placed her hand over the portion of her ice sculpture that represented Baskerville territory. With a defiant glare, she asked whose arm it was. Vakir swiftly caught her arm in his grip, his expression shifting to a confident smile. "It's my arm," he said coolly. "Because it's in my land." Camus' face flushed with embarrassment. The unexpected response caught her off guard, leaving her flustered. She stuttered, "What are you talking about? How could I belong to you?" Vakir, clearly amused by her reaction, tilted his head with a mischievous grin. "Who said you're mine?" he replied, his tone teasing and ambiguous. Before Camus could process his words, Vakir reached behind him and pulled out a knife. The sudden motion startled not just Camus, but also Adolphe and the head butler. Vakir's grin widened, taking on a darker edge, and his voice dropped. "What I'm saying," he said ominously, "is that your arm is mine." Camus froze, her usual fiery confidence shaken. "What?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Hugo, observing the exchange from his seat, broke into a cold sweat. The tension in the room was thick, and the only sound was Camus' faint hiccup of fear. As Vakir moved the knife closer to Camus' hand, she screamed and called out for help. Adolphe immediately appeared behind Vakir, his expression fierce. "Step away from my niece," he commanded, his voice filled with protective fury. Taking advantage of the distraction, Camus wrenched her arm free from Vakir's grip and ran to Adolphe, seeking the comfort of her uncle's protective presence. Adolphe glared at Hugo, his anger barely contained. "What is going on here?" he demanded. Hugo, still sweating, turned his gaze to Vakir. "You've gone too far with your joke," he said in a reprimanding tone. Vakir chuckled and revealed the truth. The knife was just a toy, one commonly given to Baskerville children to play with from a young age. The revelation left Adolf stunned and outraged. A dangerous toy like that? For children? He fumed. This is unacceptable. Vakir bowed his head humbly and offered an apology. I'm sorry if I frightened Camus, he said, his tone contrite. It was not my intention to make her cry. Adolf, however, was far from mollified. He accused Vakir of failing to take the situation seriously, his frustration evident. Hugo, seeking to diffuse the tension, stepped in. Adults shouldn't meddle in the affairs of children, he said, his tone light but firm. Let's focus on discussing the ruby mines and move on to the friendly duels. Though clearly reluctant, Adolf agreed to Hugo's suggestion. Camus, still upset and wiping away her tears, glared at Vakir. I won't forget this, she declared, her voice trembling with indignation. Vakir responded with a faint, unreadable smile, seemingly unfazed by her warning. The day of the friendly duels arrived. Children from both the Baskerville and Mord clans, aged 8 to 15, gathered to demonstrate their skills. The younger children focused on theoretical battles or mana sensitivity displays, while the older participants engaged in live combat. This year, however, all eyes were drawn to one match. The showdown between the two clans' prodigies, Camus Morgue and Vakir Van Baskerville. Camus stood confidently in the arena, her fiery red hair glinting in the sunlight. She turned to Vakir with a determined expression. Get ready, she said firmly. I won't hold back. Without hesitation, Camus began casting a spell. Her intricate hand movements and the shimmering glow of mana captivated the audience. Spectators murmured in awe as the magical energy around her grew more intense. One voice broke through the crowd. Is she casting quadra spells? The murmurs turned to exclamations of astonishment. Quadra spellcasting, the ability to cast 4 spells simultaneously, was a feat that even many adult mages struggled to achieve. To see an 8-year-old performing such a complex technique left the audience in awe. She's the Mord clan's genius mage, another spectator remarked. This is exactly what we'd expect from someone like her. Camus unleashed a flurry of attacks, casting 4 powerful spells simultaneously. Despite her effort, Vakir dodged them effortlessly, his movements fluid and precise. He shook his head slightly, a hint of criticism in his voice. Instead of showing off with flashy spells, maybe focus on mastering just one. Camus sneered, her pride wounded. Why do you even care? You're just an idiot who doesn't understand magic. With a swift incantation, she conjured a sand wall, a thick barrier of swirling grains, to separate them. But Vakir, unimpressed, broke through it with a single kick, the wall crumbling like paper. Camus watched in stunned silence. Is this the strength of someone who's bathed in the river Styx? She wondered, her thoughts racing. Taking advantage of her momentary distraction, Vakir moved in with lightning speed. Camus, realizing too late that the attack was unavoidable, shut her eyes in resignation. But the expected blow never came. When she opened her eyes, she found herself propelled backward, not by a strike, but by a flick to her forehead. The flick's sheer power sent Camus tumbling. Adolf, watching from the sidelines, stared in disbelief. A flick? That was just a flick. Camus, wincing and holding her forehead, demanded answers. Why did you flick me? Are you going easy on me? Vakir smiled faintly, raising a hand to tap his own forehead. Maybe it's time to end this before things get out of hand. Camus' eyes watered, but she refused to yield. With a defiant shout, she cast another sand wall spell. This time, she created 2 walls, layering them for extra protection. Try getting through this, she declared confidently. Vakir, still unbothered, considered simply walking around the walls but decided to humor her. Drawing back his fist, he punched straight through both barriers, creating a clean hole. Camus froze, astonished, as Vakir stepped through. As he approached her, he mimicked a flicking motion with his hand. Whose arm crossed the wall? He asked, his tone calm and deliberate. Before she could respond, he answered for her with another flick to her forehead. The stronger one? The force of the flick sent Camus sprawling to the ground again, growling in frustration. Still, she got up, ready to continue the fight. Vakir sighed inwardly, thinking, dealing with children is harder than I thought. I could end this in 0.1 seconds if I wanted to, but that would cause a whole new set of problems. While dodging Camus' relentless attacks, Vakir's eyes wandered to the arena behind him, where 2 other contestants were locked in a duel. A sword apprentice was cutting through a mage's spells with precise, powerful strikes. An idea sparked in Vakir's mind. They might be useful for this. Meanwhile, Camus' frustration boiled over. Stop running away and fight me, she yelled, her voice trembling with anger. Vakir, sensing the perfect opportunity, warned her, you might want to have a defensive spell ready. Camus blinked, confused by his sudden comment. Then she noticed the mage behind Vakir preparing a large-scale attack. Adolf, observing the unfolding scene, understood Vakir's plan and shouted in alarm. Camus, watch out. The mage's spell erupted in a massive, fiery blast that engulfed the arena. Gasps and cries of surprise rippled through the audience as the flames consumed the battlefield. The heat, light, and force of the spell left everyone momentarily blinded. In the midst of the chaos, Camus activated a defensive spell, narrowly avoiding any severe injuries. But as the dust settled, she realized her clothes had been burned away by the flames. Tears welled up in her eyes as the horrifying reality sank in. She had been exposed in front of the entire audience. Amid the gasps and murmurs from the crowd, Camus heard her uncle Adolf calling her name. She froze, torn between her instinct to hide and the overwhelming shame of the situation. How could this happen? She thought, her hands trembling as she tried to cover herself. As the smoke cleared, Vakir stepped forward, his calm figure emerging from the dissipating dust. He approached Camus and, to the audience's surprise, offered her his jacket to cover herself. Camus stared at him in shock, unable to comprehend why her supposed enemy was showing her kindness. You'll need this, Vakir said simply, his voice steady as he draped the jacket over her. Camus protested weakly, flustered by the gesture. But you'll be exposed if you give me your only jacket. Vakir brushed off her concern with a faint smile, his composure unwavering. It doesn't matter. Camus, still reeling from the chaos of the fight, couldn't understand why Vakir was taking care of her despite their earlier enmity. Her confusion deepened when she noticed a thin line of blood trailing down Vakir's arm. She pointed it out. You're hurt. Vakir glanced down, his expression momentarily surprised. He hadn't expected his body, strengthened by the river Styx, to be scratched. Examining the wound, he realized the sword of the opposing swordsman must have carried some lingering aura to pierce his defenses. As the dust fully settled, the scene became clear to the audience. Camus sat on the ground, wrapped in Vakir's jacket, while Vakir stood shirtless, a small but noticeable wound on his arm. Adolf sighed in relief, seeing that his niece was unharmed. Meanwhile, the crowd murmured in awe, marveling at Vakir's impressive physique. Despite his young age, his toned muscles and disciplined build stood as a testament to his rigorous training. Among the spectators, admiration for Vakir was growing, but Camus' reaction was more complicated. She continued to steal glances at him, her cheeks dusted with a light blush. Why am I feeling like this? She wondered, her earlier anger now replaced with something unfamiliar. Even as Adolf hugged her protectively, Camus' gaze kept drifting back to Vakir. Later, Vakir walked alongside Hugo down a dimly lit hallway. Hugo broke the silence, his voice calm but probing. How was the battle with the Moor girl? Vakir replied thoughtfully. It was interesting. I learned the purpose of the event once again. Hugo nodded slightly. A battle with a mage is different from a duel between swordsmen. Why didn't you go for a decisive blow? Vakir hesitated for a moment before admitting. I wasn't sure how to handle a lady in battle. Hugo's expression hardened. Letting your guard down will only lead to injury. Take this scratch as a lesson. The unexpected concern in Hugo's tone surprised Vakir. This wasn't the Hugo he remembered, strict, cold, and brutal. Growing up, Hugo's emotions had seemed as unyielding as stone. There were rumors that his harsh demeanor stemmed from the loss of his first wife and eldest daughter, but those weren't Vakir's concerns. Still, the faint trace of worry in Hugo's words left Vakir momentarily unsettled. Changing the subject, Hugo asked, what do you think we should do with the ruby mines? Vakir responded confidently, we should give control of the mines to the Morgs. Hugo's eyebrows shot up in surprise. And your reasoning? Vakir explained, the Baskervilles' main task is territorial expansion. The monsters and barbarians around the mines will become obstacles if we move into that region. By allowing the Morgs control of the mines, we can use them to minimize our losses. Their presence will draw those threats into the area, allowing us to handle everything at once. Hugo listened carefully, a slow smile spreading across his face. Interesting. Once the Morgs assign a large number of people to the mines, we'll push the monsters and barbarians into that region. The ruby veins will be soaked in their blood, and the Morgs will think twice before stepping onto our land again. Placing a hand on Vakir's head, Hugo acknowledged, "Your idea aligns with about 90% of what I had in mind." Impressive. Vakir accepted the praise silently, knowing the truth. This plan was originally Hugo's idea, a strategy he had carried out on Hugo's orders in his previous life. Yet, seeing it unfold from this perspective brought a sense of satisfaction. To conclude, Vakir suggested, "We should keep a close eye on the Morg's movements." Hugo dismissed the concern with a wave. "There's no need. I've already increased the number of hounds scouting the area." Vakir nodded, but kept his thoughts to himself. As Hugo and Vakir walked through the hall, Adolf's voice rang out, stopping them in their tracks. Turning toward the source, they saw Adolf approaching with a serious expression. "Hugo, I have something to discuss before I leave," Adolf said. Hugo nodded, gesturing toward a nearby room. Once seated, Hugo inquired, "What is it you want to talk about?" Adolf wasted no time. "I think it's time to resolve the issues surrounding the ruby mines peacefully," he began. "The fees for usage are just one suggestion. I have another idea, an engagement between the Morg and Baskerville children." As the two patriarchs discussed the potential union, Camus sat nearby, her gaze occasionally drifting toward Vakir, her cheeks faintly flushed. Hugo, noticing this, leaned forward and asked Adolf which children he had in mind. Adolf smiled confidently. "The eldest son of the Baskerville and the eldest daughter of the Morg clan. My niece, Camus. She's an exceptional child, both beautiful and intelligent. She lacks nothing and would make an ideal match." Hugo raised an eyebrow. "My eldest son is 25 years old this year. That's a 17-year age gap." Adolf waved the concern away. "What's a mere 17 years? It's nothing in the grand scheme of things." Before Hugo could respond, Camus interrupted. Her voice was firm as she declared, "I will not marry anyone weaker than my mother. And I don't want a significant age gap in my partner." Adolf's face twisted in frustration as he tried to reason with her. "Camus, if you insist on marrying someone stronger than your mother, you'll be alone for the rest of your life. That's not a realistic demand." Hugo, clearly displeased with Camus' attitude, added, "Engagements aren't a buffet where you can pick and choose. You must consider the bigger picture." But Camus, confident in her stance, crossed her arms. "I have no intention of playing around," she stated, her voice unwavering. Suddenly, her face flushed a deep red, and she looked away, catching the attention of both Hugo and Adolf. Adolf followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing as he realized where, or rather, at whom, Camus was looking. Vakir. Shocked, Adolf cursed silently. "This can't be happening." "Not him." Adolf leaned toward Camus and whispered harshly, "Don't even think about it. Vakir is of the Van surname, not from the Lu descent. He's a small fish in a big pond. This is absurd." Hugo, noticing the growing tension, sighed and decided to intervene. "The most important thing in an engagement is the opinion of those involved. Let's hear what Vakir has to say." All eyes turned to Vakir. Camus looked at him expectantly, her blush deepening as she awaited his answer. The room fell silent, and Vakir met her gaze before calmly stating, "I accept." Adolf's face turned beet red upon hearing Vakir's response. Adolf opened his mouth to object, but before he could say a word, Vakir continued, "To do as I'm told." Adolf's outrage doubled. What kind of attitude is that toward the Morg's clan's daughter? Camus, on the other hand, was completely flustered. Her face turned crimson as she tried to decipher Vakir's cryptic response. Is he shy? Is he secretly okay with this engagement? Her mind raced with possibilities. Hugo, clearly amused by the situation, interjected with a composed tone. "In the Baskerville household, names and titles hold little meaning. Greatness comes from ability, not bloodline. Even those of Van descent can rise to prominence." Adolf's expression remained skeptical. His eyes narrowed as he turned to scrutinize Vakir, standing before him. The young Baskerville returned the gaze, calm and unyielding, while internally assessing Adolf's strength as a six-circle mage and one of the strongest supporters of the Morg's clan. Breaking the silence, Adolf said coldly, "I don't think it's wise to rush this. We can't have just anyone become Camus' husband." Vakir reflected on the peculiar customs of the clans, where engagements seemed more like polite suggestions than binding agreements. He wondered if Adolf, with his lofty standards, was dissatisfied even with the renowned genius of the Baskerville clan. Adolf, clearly unimpressed by Vakir's aloofness, placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, attempting to force him down. But to Adolf's surprise, Vikir didn't budge, his sturdy build defying expectations. Intrigued, Adolf asked why Vikir wasn't responding and demanded to know if he was even paying attention. Vikir's blunt reply caught everyone off guard. He hadn't been listening since Adolf first suggested it was unwise to say certain things to him. Camus, standing nearby, was utterly shocked. Her uncle, one of the most powerful mages in the clan, had been dismissed by a child. Meanwhile, Hugo struggled to stifle his laughter, finding humor in the mounting tension. Adolf, instead of anger, responded with a dark, booming laugh. Turning to Hugo, he expressed his desire to have a more in-depth conversation with Vikir. Suspicious, Hugo questioned Adolf's intentions, teasingly asking if he intended to scold an 8-year-old. Adolf laughed again, explaining that he was approaching this as an uncle, not as the deputy patriarch of the Mord's clan. After all, Vikir might one day marry his niece. Camus pleaded with her uncle to drop the idea, but Adolf ignored her, claiming such moments were inevitable. With some hesitation, Hugo allowed the conversation, but it quickly became clear this wasn't going to be a talk, it was a duel. The scene shifted to the arena. Vikir and Adolf stood face to face, while Hugo and Camus observed from the sidelines. Adolf declared he would test Vikir's abilities and demanded the boy show him everything he was capable of. Vikir, ever confident, thought to himself that revealing his full potential might actually knock Adolf out cold. To start, Adolf cast an intricate spell. Using fire, earth, and water magic in flawless harmony, he crafted a clay pot, a display of his incredible control. Camus explained to Hugo that this was typical of her uncle's unmatched skill. Adolf filled the pot with water, balanced it on his head, and issued his challenge. If Vikir could make even a single drop of water spill, he'd be victorious. Vikir studied the pot and analyzed his chances. The duel presented a rare opportunity to gauge Adolf's true power, but Vikir knew he had to be cautious. A head-on fight offered only a slim chance of success. With a plan forming in his mind, Vikir charged forward, sword in hand, racing straight for Adolf. Camus shouted in disbelief, warning that such a direct approach would surely fail. As Vikir's sword came crashing down, Adolf calmly cast a barrier spell, easily blocking the attack. Amused, Adolf asked Camus why she was helping Vikir, remarking that shield magic was the perfect counter to swordsmen. Vikir clicked his tongue in annoyance, frustrated by the failed attempt. Adolf, now on the offensive, unleashed a barrage of spells. But Vikir's agility and quick reflexes allowed him to evade effortlessly. From the sidelines, Camus couldn't contain her outrage, calling out that Adolf had never used this level of magic in their own duels. Adolf, surprised by her support of Vikir, turned to her with a mock-crying face, accusing her of betrayal. Then, looking back at Vikir, he growled with playful menace, vowing revenge for the insult. Hugo observed the battle with sharp focus, analyzing both fighters. Vikir's attacks were swift, almost too fast to follow, yet still within the realm of dodgeability. Hugo decided not to intervene. He was curious to see how the young Hound would perform and wanted to give Adolf a first-hand demonstration of Vikir's potential. As Vikir deftly dodged Adolf's spells, he carefully studied his opponent's techniques. Drawing on memories from his previous life and his current youthful form, he devised a strategy. Adolf, with a smug grin, declared that no sword could pierce his shield. However, cracks began to form as Vikir struck the same spot with relentless precision. Adolf's confidence wavered as he noticed Vikir's machine-like efficiency and skillful swordsmanship. Just as the shield seemed ready to give way, Vikir's sword shattered into pieces. Adolf smirked triumphantly, taunting the boy for neglecting his weapon's durability. But the mood shifted as Hugo and Camus, watching from the sidelines, exchanged shocked looks. Adolf continued his mockery, oblivious to the expressions of those around him. Suddenly, water poured over his face, completely drenching him. Bewildered, Adolf shouted, demanding to know how a shard of the broken sword had pierced the pot and spilled its contents. Vikir, calm and smiling, remarked that the pot must have been full. Camus, still processing the unexpected turn of events, blushed as the realization hit. Vikir had defeated her formidable uncle. Thoughts of marriage fluttered through her mind as she struggled to contain her amazement. Meanwhile, Hugo stood silently, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just luck or coincidence. Vikir's victory showcased incredible talent and strength. Hugo couldn't help but wonder if he was raising a hound far more powerful than he had ever imagined. Years passed, and the young hounds continued their training. 7 years after their initial step into the Baskerville training grounds, they faced a new challenge, a monstrous horned bear. As the creature charged, the hounds attacked in unison, their swords striking one after another. From the sidelines, Staffordshire Baskerville, a shadow hound of the Baskerville clan and their instructor, carefully observed. He knew that such battles were grueling for the young fighters. With a commanding voice, he urged them to aim for the monster's hind legs to slow it down instead of wasting energy targeting its vital points. Among the group were the triplets, who executed coordinated strikes with remarkable efficiency, leaving the beast exhausted. Staffordshire nodded in approval, noting how well their dark crimson auras complemented the Baskerville fighting style. With the monster weakened, the rest of the young hounds launched their attacks, finally taking it down. Staffordshire applauded their efforts, congratulating them on becoming lower-rank sword experts and mastering the first Baskerville technique. However, his tone turned serious as he reminded them of the harsh reality awaiting outside the training grounds. This monster was caged and predictable, but the wild ox bear on life engulfing forest would be a different story entirely. Death could come quickly in the real world, and survival would require their bloodline strength and the experience they would build over time. With these words, the 7-year training came to a close. Staffordshire congratulated the hounds on their graduation, wishing them luck in their future endeavors. With their training successfully completed, the young hounds were buzzing with chatter. 2 of them struck up a conversation about their preferences for the Baskerville clan's 7 night orders, each specializing in tasks like guarding, searching, assassinating, and all-out warfare. The first hound revealed his admiration for the Wolfhound order, while the second listed his top picks: Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler. Their discussion soon turned to a certain someone sitting atop the carcass of a slain ox bear, Vakir. Curious, the second hound asked who his companion was referring to. The first clarified, pointing toward Vakir, and noted how remarkable it was that he had taken down an ox bear much larger than the one they had just faced. They marveled at how Vakir had already achieved the rank of a high-level sword expert, mastering the third Baskerville technique, which placed him on par with the shadow hounds. Meanwhile, Vakir sat on the fallen beast, lost in thought. Though he had made significant progress, reaching the 5th Baskerville technique and graduating as an intermediate-rank swordsman, he was frustrated. The journey had taken longer than he anticipated, and his growth felt agonizingly slow. His musings were interrupted by the arrival of the head butler, Barrymore, who addressed him as Master Vakir. Barrymore informed him that the Patriarch was looking for him, and that his assignment had been decided. With a serious expression, Vakir simply replied, "All right," entering the Patriarch's office. Vakir greeted Hugo, only to be met with a curt grunt. He immediately noticed a small cut on Hugo's nose and asked about it. Hugo explained that he'd been subjugating barbarians on life engulfing forest and had been outmatched by an archer, though he made sure to leave a matching scar on her face. After a brief silence, Hugo congratulated Vakir on his graduation. Yet his tone was foreboding as he added that things would only get tougher from here. Vakir suspected this was about his new assignment, and his thoughts wandered back to his previous life. Before his regression, he had been a junior knight of the Pitbull Order, sent to the treacherous life engulfing forest. For 21 harrowing months, he faced death relentlessly, little more than an expendable soldier thrown into battle. At the time, Baskerville children were divided into 2 categories upon turning 15: elites and expendables. The expendables were cannon fodder, sent to the front lines to die, while the elites received education in politics and administration. Over time, surviving expendables gained experience and became bodyguards for the elites, while the elites honed their skills in leadership. Vakir understood the 5th Baskerville technique was designed to help the elites catch up with the experience gained by expendables in real-life combat. Yet before his regression, his swordsmanship had stagnated at the 4th technique, and he knew Hugo would never allow an illegitimate child like him to walk the elite path. His thoughts were abruptly cut short as Hugo spoke again. This time, Hugo suggested that Vakir should try his hand at the lower house of Parliament. Perplexed, Vakir asked for clarification. Hugo explained that the lower house of Parliament handled the Baskerville clan's regional administration, assisting with legislation, law enforcement, and economic matters. They invited businesses, managed infrastructure, and oversaw everything from small community issues to large-scale governance. In essence, it was a role that balanced politics with practicality, a far cry from the blood-soaked battlefield Vikir was familiar with. Vikir was taken aback when Hugo, the patriarch of the Baskerville clan, selected him, an illegitimate child, for the elite course. Hugo explained that Vikir's achievements by the age of 10 had already surpassed those of children hailed as geniuses, and he deserved to be treated accordingly. Hugo revealed the position Vikir would take, Deputy Consul of Underdog City. Both the consul and deputy consul positions there were currently vacant, and Hugo asked Vikir if he wanted to give it a try. After weighing the offer, Vikir decided to accept. But before moving forward, he brought up a matter involving the Morgs clan and the Ruby Mines. Hugo, unsurprisingly, already seemed familiar with it and commented on how Vikir had outsmarted Adolf Morgs. Vikir nodded and, with confidence, made a bold request to borrow his reward from the incident. Although the specifics of what Vikir wanted weren't clear, the head butler accompanying them was visibly shocked by the audacity of the request. Hugo, however, remained unfazed. Stamping a document, he assured Vikir that he trusted him not to do anything reckless. Vikir promised not to disappoint, though he couldn't shake the odd feeling of hearing Hugo call him son. It was a term that would have been unthinkable before his regression. As Vikir and the head butler walked down the hallway, the butler spoke in a grave tone. He highlighted how highly Hugo regarded Vikir, pointing to the unprecedented appointment of a consul prior to a battle assignment. Referring to this as the disciplines of kingship, the butler implied that Vikir was being groomed for even greater responsibilities. Vikir, however, wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He understood that success wasn't guaranteed and resolved to take his new role seriously. For him, this was a chance to hone his skills in a relatively safe environment. Despite not being particularly invested in current events, memories of his previous life still haunted him, especially the vivid sensation of his head being severed by a guillotine. That memory fueled his resolve. Someday, he vowed, he would make Hugo La Baskerville feel the same chill of despair. Elsewhere in Baskerville territory, preparations were underway at a large villa in Underdog City. A bald man barked orders at two workers, instructing them to ensure the villa was spotless by the next day for the arrival of the new deputy consul. The workers acknowledged his orders, though one later expressed curiosity about the newcomer. He hoped the new deputy consul had business experience. The other worker, however, revealed with some disbelief that the new appointee was only 15 years old. As they speculated, a young boy approached the villa. Not recognizing him, one worker placed a hand on his shoulder, asking whose child he was and whether an employee had brought him. The boy, looking irritated, ordered the worker to remove his hand. Pulling out a document, he revealed his identity as none other than Vikir, the newly appointed deputy consul. The workers were stunned by the verification, but also confused. Why had he arrived a day early? Unconcerned by their confusion, Vikir promptly ordered them to prepare food and drinks for a party. As he strode into the villa with purpose, the workers exchanged puzzled looks, wondering why their new deputy consul seemed intent on celebrating so soon. The party was in full swing, and the villa buzzed with energy. Tables were piled high with food and drinks, and nobles mingled, enjoying the lively atmosphere. But not everyone was celebrating. Chihuahua Baskerville, the general secretary of Underdog City, paced nervously in his office, clearly agitated. From his window, he could see the young deputy consul hosting a party right at the workplace. Chihuahua could hardly believe it. The city was already struggling with the reputation of corrupt officials. Every deputy consul before Vikir had been dismissed for accepting bribes. And now, this new appointee was drinking and partying on the job? Chihuahua was ready to burst with frustration when, to his shock, Vikir suddenly appeared behind him. "Are you the general secretary?" Vikir asked, startling Chihuahua so badly that he nearly jumped out of his skin. Turning to face the unexpected visitor, Chihuahua stammered a response, wondering how long Vikir had been standing there. Introducing himself as Vikir Van Baskerville, the new deputy consul, Vikir greeted Chihuahua with a calm confidence. Chihuahua, regaining his composure, introduced himself in return. Vakir repeated Chihuahua's name, pausing when he noticed something peculiar. Chihuahua had no middle name. Chihuahua winced internally, expecting ridicule. In the Baskerville hierarchy, a lack of a middle name often marked someone as an outsider, an employee, not a blood relative. Chihuahua had endured years of discrimination from Baskerville officials because of this, and he braced himself for more of the same. But instead of mocking him, Vakir placed a hand on Chihuahua's shoulder and simply said, "Nice." Caught completely off guard, Chihuahua could only respond with a confused look. Vakir continued, explaining that he had reviewed Chihuahua's personal background on the way over. He acknowledged that Chihuahua was born and raised in Underdog City, then praised his hard work and assured him that he wouldn't interfere with how he managed his responsibilities. Chihuahua, still baffled, muttered an awkward, "Okay." He couldn't help but wonder if this was some bizarre new form of harassment. After all, why would Vakir, the same person who ordered the party, be here to discuss work? But Vakir's tone shifted as he got down to business. He noted that while the personal law system seemed functional, there were glaring issues with Underdog's judicial system. The real problem wasn't just the illegal businesses. It was that the underground economy wielded more power than the law itself. Simply shutting down these businesses wouldn't solve the issue. The heads of these operations needed to be removed. As the deputy consul, Vakir explained his job was to create and enforce laws. While he respected the current system, he intended to introduce a new law to deal with the underground economy. Chihuahua was stunned. "A new law?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. Vakir nodded, stating that within a week, he would ensure the underground economy was in shambles. However, he needed a cause, something that would justify the creation and enforcement of this new law. Chihuahua was puzzled. Why did Vakir need a cause to deal with illegal businesses? Vakir clarified that as a young and newly appointed deputy consul, he needed a strong performance to establish credibility. He then glanced out the window, his expression twisting into a sly grin. To put it simply, Vakir said with an air of mischief, "I'll lay out poop for the flies." Chihuahua was left speechless, unsure of what Vakir was planning. The next day, Vakir arrived at Dort Smile Street in downtown Underdog City. The area was bustling with people, and a large crowd had gathered, their conversations buzzing with curiosity. All eyes were on Vakir as he prepared to execute the first step of his plan. Vakir stood confidently on the stage, holding a large stake in his hand. General Secretary Chihuahua and his companions exchanged puzzled looks, trying to figure out what the young deputy consul was planning. They couldn't help but notice the large crowd that had gathered, all murmuring with curiosity. Since dawn, Vakir had been standing on that stage biding his time. Finally, he stepped forward and introduced himself as the newly appointed deputy consul of Underdog City. The crowd buzzed with surprise. Whispers spread through the audience. Many found it hard to believe someone so young held such a high position. While a few murmured that Vakir was cute, others questioned what someone his age could possibly accomplish. Undeterred, Vakir raised his voice and addressed the crowd. He reminded them of the Baskerville family's long-standing laws, which remained as strict as ever regardless of who held office. But the crowd was skeptical. Doubt hung heavy in the air as people questioned his ability to enforce those laws. Some even muttered about the corruption of past officials, assuming Vakir would eventually succumb to the same fate. Standing beside him, Chihuahua could no longer stay silent. Frustrated, he shouted at the crowd, demanding that they show respect to the new deputy consul. The crowd fell quiet, though their skepticism lingered. Some even suggested Chihuahua might be better suited for the role than Vakir. Suddenly, Vakir's next move silenced the crowd entirely. With an impressive display of strength, he raised the stake high and with one powerful motion, drove it into the ground. The earth seemed to tremble from the force, leaving the onlookers in awe. Gasps echoed through the audience as they struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Then, Vakir dropped a bombshell. Standing tall, he declared the introduction of a special law under his authority as deputy consul. He called it the Vakir Special Law. The first provision? Anyone who managed to pull the stake from the ground would be awarded 100 million gold on the spot, paid personally by Vakir. The crowd erupted in disbelief. 100 million, they shouted, their voices blending into a chaotic mix of awe and doubt. Murmurs spread rapidly as people tried to comprehend what they'd just heard. Was it really that simple? Could pulling out a stake make someone unimaginably rich? Despite the excitement, no one stepped forward. Vakir scanned the hesitant faces and challenged them, asking if no one dared to claim the prize. When the silence continued, he raised the stakes, literally, With a sly grin, he announced a second provision of the Vakir special law. Paragraph 1, Article 2, he declared. The person who pulls out the stake will now be paid 1 billion gold. The crowd's murmurs turned into gasps of shock. 1 billion gold was a life-changing fortune, far beyond anything they had ever dreamed of. Yet hesitation lingered. Breaking the tension, a loud laugh echoed from the crowd. An overweight older man stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. He accused Vakir of mocking them, calling the whole spectacle ridiculous. Who would even try? He barked. But someone in the crowd pointed out, in a softer voice, that 1 billion gold wasn't exactly pocket change. The mood began to shift as whispers of intrigue rippled through the audience. On stage, Chihuahua stood behind Vakir, growing more confused by the second. He wondered why they were the ones getting embarrassed instead of the crowd. Vakir, however, ignored all the noise. He remained focused, addressing the crowd once more. So, he asked, his voice calm but commanding, "Is there no one brave enough to take the challenge?" When no one stepped forward, Vakir surprised the crowd yet again by raising the stakes. This time, the reward skyrocketed to 10 billion gold. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the sheer magnitude of the offer. As Vakir confidently repeated his challenge, the crowd remained in a state of disbelief. Some whispered that it had to be a joke, while others toyed with the idea of testing their luck. However, caution won out for most. People pointed nervously at the sword on Vakir's waist, warning each other about the risks of being seen as greedy by the deputy consul. Despite the allure of the reward, no one dared to step forward. As Vakir prepared to speak again, Chihuahua leaned in and whispered anxiously, reminding him that there wasn't nearly enough money in the city to fulfill such an extravagant promise. Before Vakir could respond, a small hand shot up from the crowd. The hand belonged to a young girl holding a basket of flowers in her other hand. With a timid voice, she asked if she could try. The crowd gasped in astonishment. A frail little girl? Trying to pull the stake? An old man in the crowd recognized her. Judy, the flower girl, he muttered, attempting to dissuade her. But Judy explained that her mother was sick, and she had no choice but to try. Ignoring the warnings, she approached the stage, her movements hesitant but determined. Standing before the massive stake, Judy glanced nervously at Vakir, who stood silently behind it. Her small frame shook with fear, but she steeled herself. Judy wasn't thinking about the billions of gold on offer. She simply hoped to earn a few coins for her bravery or sell her basket of flowers to the gathered crowd. Vakir's expression was unreadable as he addressed her with a single word, "Pull." His tone was calm, devoid of emotion, leaving Judy unable to tell if he was angry, amused, or indifferent. Taking a deep breath, she wrapped her small hands around the stake and pulled with all her strength. To her astonishment, the stake slid out of the ground effortlessly, as though it had never been stuck there at all. The crowd froze in stunned silence, their disbelief written across their faces. How could such a tiny girl succeed where no one else dared to try? Judy stared at the stake in her hands, unsure of what to do next. She glanced at Vakir, who was watching her intently. When he reached for his sword, her heart sank, and she shut her eyes tightly, fearing the worst. Tears welled up as she thought of her sick mother and the uncertain future that lay ahead. But instead of steel, a small bag landed in her hands. Opening her eyes, Judy saw Vakir kneeling before her, holding out a bag filled with gold. In a calm voice, he said, "For now, here's 100 million gold." Judy stood frozen, clutching the bag tightly, still unsure if she was dreaming. Vakir then asked where her home was, explaining that 10 billion gold would be too heavy to carry and would need to be delivered. He also assured her that a guard would be assigned to protect her reward. Finally, placing a hand gently on her head, Vakir said, "This is the law. It must always be obeyed." The crowd erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Vakir had actually followed through on his outrageous promise. Even Chihuahua, watching from the stage, was left slack-jawed, unable to process what he had just witnessed. This performance was a game-changer. The Vakir special law became the talk of the town, overshadowing even the Baskerville clan's long-standing self-governance law. For the first time, the people began to see the young deputy consul as more than just a symbol. He was someone who kept his word, no matter how outlandish it seemed. The citizens were deeply moved by the simple fairness of the Vakir special law, rewards for obeying the law and consequences for breaking it. Discussions about the new deputy consul spread like wildfire. Unlike his corrupt predecessors, Vakir was earning respect for his unwavering commitment to his word. For the first time in years, people admired their leadership. The implementation of the Vakir special law led to a dramatic drop in crime, and the city began to feel safer and more orderly. In the deputy consul's office, Chihuahua had just finished writing something on a board when Vakir approached and noted that it was written in the Eastern language. Complimenting Chihuahua's impressive handwriting, Vakir sparked a conversation. Chihuahua, still moved by the events from earlier, expressed his admiration for Vakir's daring performance. After 2 decades of working in the city, Chihuahua admitted he had never been so touched. Vakir shared his perspective, explaining that ruling through fear and wrath, as some leaders did, wasn't the answer. He emphasized that trust in the law was essential, and that's why he had carefully crafted his performance, to command attention and leave a lasting impression. Chihuahua, overcome with emotion, pledged his loyalty to Vakir, promising to follow him for the rest of his life. Vakir tried to calm him down, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. Reflecting on the success of his plan, Vakir couldn't help but compare it to a future he once knew, one shaped by Camus morgues. While she had reduced crime rates to a mere 1%, her methods had relied heavily on fear, leaving her unpopular among the people. Vakir was determined to take a different path. He turned his attention to the map laid out before him, marking several locations. These were potential hideouts or operational bases for illegal groups. The real problems are just beginning, he mused. The 10 billion gold reward had already been spent, and now they needed to recover those funds. Pointing to the marked areas, Vakir explained his plan to maintain surveillance and confiscate the dirty money flowing through these criminal networks. Chihuahua, intrigued, asked how Vakir knew where these groups operated. Tapping his nose with a smirk, Vakir quipped, "I can smell them." The truth, of course, lay in his memories from before his regression. Vakir knew these areas intimately, having already surveyed them in his previous life. Chihuahua was impressed by Vakir's investigative skills, marveling at how thorough he seemed. Their conversation was interrupted by a staff member bursting into the room. Addressing Vakir, the Staffordshire reported that the Village Hall's Youth Autonomy Association had requested a meeting. Chihuahua, unfazed, commented that it was probably about time for such a meeting. Vakir, on the other hand, referred to the group as arrogant bastards and questioned their motives. Chihuahua explained that the Youth Autonomy Association was composed of members from various clans. It was founded by the second and third generations of Baskerville's 7 native families. Despite its formal name, Chihuahua dismissed it as little more than a rowdy social club. He speculated that its young, entitled members likely had opinions about the Vakir special law. Vakir's response was sharp and cutting. "The dung flies have started to smell the bait," he said with a grin. His blunt statement caught both Chihuahua and the staff member off guard, leaving them momentarily speechless as Vakir prepared for his next move. Vakir smirked coldly, suggesting it was time to deal with the pests gnawing away at the city's foundations. Deep within the burning suspension, a high-end club located in Underdog City's most luxurious hotel, a raucous party was underway. The VVIP lounge, rented out for an eye-watering 10 million gold for a mere 6 hours, was bustling with the 7 key members of the Youth Autonomy Association. These were the second and third generation heirs of Baskerville Territory's most influential families, each one steeped in power and privilege. The atmosphere was lively as the group entertained themselves by building a pyramid-shaped tower of glasses and pouring expensive wine over them, letting the liquid cascade dramatically. The blonde ringleader of the group turned to the waiters and, with a smirk, instructed them to drink the wine spilled on the table. Without hesitation, the waiters complied, lapping up the liquid like obedient dogs, and even thanking him for the privilege of tasting such a fine drink. Reclining on a plush sofa, the blonde man boasted about his wealth, claiming that no matter how recklessly he spent, his money always seemed to replenish itself. One of his companions chimed in, attributing their fortunes to the Baskervilles. He noted that the Baskervilles' focus on territorial expansion created an endless supply of barbarians to kidnap and sell as slaves. Another companion laughed, agreeing that the Baskervilles' ambitions were a blessing. "They're like our personal hunting dogs," one remarked. "Always there to protect us." The blonde man scoffed. "Protect us? They're just sword-wielding idiots, easily manipulated." He recounted how they had orchestrated a conflict between Mesamadrano clan and Baskerville clan, which resulted in the Baskervilles wiping out the latter. The group laughed heartily, mocking the Baskervilles for their naivety. Amid the laughter, one companion brought up the new deputy consul, Vakir Van Baskerville. The blonde man sneered, asking if anyone had heard of him before. When they all replied no, he suggested teaching the boy a lesson. The plan was simple. Invite Vikir to a lavish party, ply him with expensive drinks and women, then force him to foot the bill afterward. The group laughed at the idea, convinced that the 15-year-old wouldn't dare report them since he wouldn't have the funds to pay. As they finalized their plan, a waiter entered, accompanied by several women, announcing their arrival. The group's attention shifted to the women, eager to indulge in the night's entertainment. But one of them noticed an unfamiliar young man standing among the women and questioned his presence. The waiter, uncertain, explained that the boy had entered with such confidence that no one had stopped him. The young man was none other than Vikir himself. The blond man gestured for a waiter to handle the situation. Grabbing Vikir by the hair, the waiter angrily demanded to know why he was there. Vikir's eyes glowed with cold fury, and a palpable tension filled the room. Suddenly, silence fell as the waiter's arm twisted at an unnatural angle, forcing a howl of pain. The group froze in shock as Vikir calmly stepped forward. One of the companions, still reeling, stammered in disbelief, recognizing Vikir as the deputy consul. "Why are you here?" he asked. Vikir's reply was simple and cutting. "You invited me." The blond man, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, forced a laugh. "Well, isn't this amazing?" he exclaimed, trying to diffuse the tension. "The deputy consul himself has graced us with his presence at our party." Vikir sat silently, watching as the blond man leaned in to whisper to one of his companions. Their hushed conversation wasn't subtle enough to escape his sharp ears. The blond man suggested they go ahead with their plan, to keep Vikir there and force him to pay for the entire party once it was over. His companion nodded in agreement, eager to see how Vikir would handle the situation. Vikir had heard enough. Slamming his hand down on the table, he interrupted their scheming. The entire table suddenly exploded, sending glasses of expensive drinks crashing to the floor. The explosion startled everyone in the room. The blond man's eyes widened in disbelief. Watching the champagne tower shatter and fall, he couldn't help but wonder if Vikir had used mana manipulation to destroy it with a mere touch. His thoughts raced as he realized something troubling. Vikir wasn't just an ordinary 15-year-old. He was a graduate of the Baskervilles' intense training. The blond man's companion was equally stunned. Whispering angrily, he admitted they had underestimated Vikir, thinking he was just a child. "Do something," the blond man snapped at his companion, but the latter shook his head, terrified. He knew they'd stand no chance against Vikir. Suddenly, Vikir placed a firm hand on the shoulder of one of the companions. The man froze in fear and, in a panic, blurted out that they would pay for all the drinks themselves. Vikir's gaze darkened as he questioned the man directly. "Were you planning to force me to pay for everything?" The man's expression shifted from panic to regret as he realized his massive mistake. Another companion tried to defuse the situation, nervously asking who would even dare try such a thing. The blond man joined in, laughing awkwardly, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. He explained that their intentions had been noble. They simply wanted to test Vikir to see if he was strong enough to resist the city's corruption. The blond man's companion quickly added, "It looks like you've passed. You're exactly the kind of leader Underdog City needs." But Vikir wasn't convinced by their feeble excuses. Without warning, he lunged at the man sitting closest to him, delivering a devastating palm strike that resembled a claw attack. His hand clutched the man's stomach with crushing force as he leaned in and spoke firmly. "An owner can test their dog, but a dog should never test its owner. No matter the situation." The room fell into an uneasy silence as Vikir's eyes swept across the group. He asked if they were so unmoved by his actions because they had grown complacent with their wealth and power. He warned them that they had no idea what true fear looked like. Without hesitation, Vikir threw the man to the ground and stomped on his face. Looking back at the others, he asked coldly, "Do you even know why I'm doing this? If you don't, then perhaps you'll need the same treatment." The blond man's face turned pale with fear. Stammering, he insisted that they understood perfectly why Vikir had acted this way. But Vikir wasn't satisfied. He kicked the man whose face was beneath his boot and replied, "If you really knew, you'd understand what comes next." Anger bubbled up among the group. The blond man called Vikir a bastard, while another companion sneered, questioning if Vikir really thought he could get away with this. In a flash, Vikir appeared right in front of the second man, his expression cold and unyielding. "You're guilty of abduction, kidnapping, illegal slave trafficking, and insulting Baskerville," he said sharply. The group froze, their faces reflecting pure shock. How did he know about their crimes? Before they could process his words, Vakir punched the second man with brutal force. Animals don't learn until you teach them, Vakir said, his voice dripping with disdain. His expression twisted into a sinister grin as he added, "And now, it's time for me to teach you disobedient creatures a lesson." In the dimly lit confines of a prison cell, two men stood in stark contrast to one another. Deputy Consul Vakir appeared calm and composed, while General Secretary Chihuahua's face betrayed a mix of shock and unease. Before them, a blond man with a battered face screamed profanities, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The blond man's tirade was relentless. He accused Vakir of orchestrating some underhanded scheme that would provoke his father into retaliation. With venom in his tone, he promised to kill them both the moment he was released, vowing never to forgive them for what they'd done. Chihuahua, visibly distressed, turned to Vakir, questioning the severity of the man's injuries. "Did you really have to go this far?" he asked. Vakir, his expression indifferent, replied with a faint smirk. "Do you think I overdid it?" Chihuahua's answer was an emphatic yes. He couldn't fathom how anyone could inflict such brutal injuries on another human being. He likened the man to a meat bag, battered beyond recognition. But Vakir remained unfazed. With a cold smile, he strode toward the cell, assuring Chihuahua that he hadn't even started yet. Chihuahua's disbelief deepened. "What are you planning to do?" he asked cautiously. Vakir's response was chilling. "I'm going to execute all the wicked civil servants who've turned into a hideous organization." He gestured toward the prisoners. "Just look at their arrogant faces. They've completely ignored the authority of the Baskerville clan. This is the result of a lack of proper education." The blond man and his companions, sensing the gravity of their situation, abandoned their bravado. They begged for mercy, offering Vakir everything they had if he would spare their lives. Chihuahua, ever pragmatic, voiced his concern. "You do realize their families won't sit idly by, right? They're cowardly, yes, but daring enough to seek revenge. This could spiral out of control." Vakir's confident smile didn't waver. He reassured Chihuahua that the families wouldn't dare retaliate. "These men are tied to the criminal underworld of Underdog City," he explained. "Their families are just as complicit. They wouldn't dare raise a complaint." Chihuahua pressed further. "But what about the evidence? Without proof, this could backfire." Vakir, unfazed, replied cryptically, "I have my ways of finding evidence. And if there isn't any, I'll make my own." Vakir's calm demeanor masked a deeper calculation. He wasn't concerned about what might happen next. The world was on the brink of a sudden shift, and he knew he would soon be dispatched to battle. Even if that didn't happen immediately, his departure for the academy was inevitable. Standing before the prisoners, Vakir's voice turned cold and methodical as he listed their crimes: human trafficking, kidnapping, bribery, blackmail, assault through intermediaries, and murder. His words fell like hammer blows in the eerie silence. The blond man, desperation written across his face, denied everything and demanded evidence. Vakir's only response was a smirk. "If I present evidence," he asked, "will you accept your punishment?" The blond man lowered his gaze, his guilt apparent. His defiance gave way to a silent plea, as if he were thinking, "I'll never bring shame to my family, even if I die here." Suddenly, the tense atmosphere was interrupted by the arrival of a bald man carrying a bag. The man greeted Vakir with a casual air, as though nothing out of the ordinary was happening. "Your custom order is ready," he announced, placing the bag at Vakir's feet. Vakir nodded, thanking the man for his timely delivery. The bald man chuckled and stepped back as Vakir opened the bag, revealing an array of tools. As Vakir carefully arranged his tools, the bald man, who had been watching with a mix of fascination and dread, finally spoke up. He admitted that despite 30 years of experience in torturing people, he had never seen anything like the tools Vakir was preparing. With a nervous chuckle, he asked where Vakir had come up with such terrifying devices. Vakir shrugged nonchalantly. "I didn't invent them. They were common where I came from." The bald man froze, visibly unsettled. "Where you came from? What hellhole is that?" Vakir chuckled. "Something like that," he replied, then asked, "Would you like to learn how to use them?" The bald man quickly shook his head, pale at the mere thought. "No thanks. If I saw what you were about to do, I'd probably vomit everything I've eaten for a week." Vakir smirked and nodded, turning his attention back to his tools. As he gazed at them, his mind wandered back to the era of destruction, a time when even the demon clans would crumble under advanced interrogation techniques. Torturing prisoners of war from the demon clans had pushed the evolution of these methods to their peak. Opening his coat, Vakir revealed the full array of tools strapped to his body. The blond man's defiant bravado melted into sheer terror as he let out a high-pitched squeal. Vakir looked at the prisoners, his expression cold. "What happened to your confidence?" he asked mockingly. "Where's that tough talk about not admitting anything, no matter what?" Buttoning the cuffs of his sleeves, Vakir added, "Don't say anything just yet. I'd like to savor this. It brings back memories." The blond man couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down his face as fear consumed him. Meanwhile, rumors of the arrests of the 7 wicked gangs spread rapidly through Underdog City. Anywhere 3 or more citizens gathered, the topic was unavoidable. In a nearby tavern, patrons debated the events. "Good riddance," one man said. "Those gangs treated ordinary people like pests." Another, more skeptical patron doubted the arrests would lead to much. "The new deputy consul might make some noise, but I bet he'll release them soon enough. They're too connected to the native families." A third chimed in, "Still, the charges against them are serious. They might actually be executed this time." The room fell into murmurs as the group discussed whether the children of native families could truly be put to death. One patron reminded the group of Vakir's reputation for ruthlessness. "This is the same man who burned 10 billion gold just to prove a point. Don't underestimate him." But others believed the arrests were part of a political stunt. "It's just a power play," one patron said dismissively. "The native families will apologize, and the gang members will walk free once everything's smoothed over." Initially, events seemed to follow those predictions. The Mablink, Pyre, Luib, Shanao, Duragamu, Hermes, and Prada clans issued formal apologies to Deputy Consul Vakir. The gesture, however, wasn't enough to save the gang leaders. In the heart of the city's central square, 7 severed heads were hung on display. Salt preserved the grotesque expressions of agony etched on their faces, a chilling testament to the suffering they endured before their deaths. Above the heads, a public notice detailed the punishments meted out under the Baskerville Family Autonomy Constitution, renowned for its strict laws and merciless penalties. Clause 1. The banning of illegal brothels. The punishment? Tattooing the symbol for sex all over the criminal's face. Clause 2. The banning of illegal gambling. The penalty was wrist amputation, carried out 72 times at regular intervals, matching the number of offenses. Clause 3. The banning of illegal private loans. The punishment was eye removal, though in this case, the punishment was suspended in response to pleas from the criminal's victims. Clause 4. The banning of illegal lobbying. The penalty? Exile. Since the criminals were already dead, their headless bodies were thrown outside the castle walls. The crowd stood frozen, staring at the grisly sight before them. The severed heads of the 7 gang leaders and the detailed punishments described in the notice left everyone in shock. In his office, Vakir addressed Chihuahua, who was still reeling from the events. "There's no need for surprise," Vakir said coldly. "These laws have always been in place. This is simply the first time the so-called native families have actually faced the consequences." Vakir believed that this unprecedented enforcement would spark a chain reaction, leading to inevitable change. He also predicted a violent fallout. "When the destruction begins," he warned, "Underdog City will become a bloodbath." Turning to Chihuahua, Vakir issued a grim directive. "Brace yourself. You'll be joining me for the next step in our strategy." Chihuahua blinked in disbelief, clearly shaken. The scene shifted. Chihuahua, now standing among a crowd of masked figures, wore an unfamiliar mask of his own. Turning slightly, he whispered nervously to the figure inside a cage behind him. None other than Vakir himself. "Are you sure this is the right strategy?" Chihuahua asked. Vakir's reply was short and direct. "Don't you trust me?" As Chihuahua stood silently, more people filed into the chaotic scene. Like him, they wore masks to conceal their identities, and their presence marked the start of an illegal slave auction. Underdog City, located on the outskirts of Baskerville territory, was notorious for its lawlessness. Among its darkest secrets was an underground slave auction. In the middle of nowhere, a massive tent had been erected, drawing luxurious carriages from across the region. The auction offered a grim array of products: kidnapped barbarians, fallen nobles, and commoners alike, all waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Even more troubling was the fact that the Baskerville family was completely unaware of this operation. At the entrance to the tent, the auctioneer greeted attendees with theatrical enthusiasm. His demeanor changed slightly when he noticed Chihuahua's group. Recognizing their signature style, he greeted them as representatives of the Mablink clan, a regular and prestigious customer of the auction. Looking at their identification papers, the auctioneer noted that Chihuahua's group was there as sellers. He mentioned that the Mablink clan had been dissatisfied with their previous purchases, but Chihuahua reassured him, claiming they were satisfied with the quality of the auction's products. The auctioneer's attention then turned to Vikir, sitting in one of the cages. His striking black hair and crimson eyes immediately caught the man's attention. A rare product, the auctioneer mused with a greedy glint in his eyes. He promised to secure an excellent price for him. Chihuahua nodded, feigning agreement, and left the task to the auctioneer. The man bid farewell, wishing Chihuahua a pleasant time at the circus. Inside the tent, the crowd murmured in anticipation as the auctioneer took the stage. The attendees, a mixture of criminals and the wealthy elite, discussed their preferences for the slaves on offer. Some were drawn to mysterious or exotic appearances, others to beauty and tragedy. Kidnapped nobles or fallen aristocrats with heartbreaking backstories. Everyone agreed on one thing. They hoped for an exceptional lineup of products. The auctioneer began with an impressive first item, an A-rank monster known as the Mercy Lego. This fearsome, cow-like creature from the depths of hell was said to possess 19 hearts, making it nearly impossible to kill without destroying them all. The auctioneer enthusiastically listed the uses for the Mercy Lego. From its leather to its meat, bones, and intestines, nothing goes to waste, he proclaimed. He started the bidding at 100 million gold, and the price skyrocketed as the crowd eagerly raised their offers. 140 million, 200 million, and finally 250 million gold. When no further bids came, the auctioneer slammed his hammer down with dramatic flair. Sold for 250 million gold, he declared, his voice echoing through the tent. The auction continued, showcasing a variety of items, each with unique qualities and uses. The crowd eagerly placed bids, hoping to secure valuable purchases. This underground slave auction remained a dark and hidden spectacle, thriving far from the reach of the law. As the auctioneer introduced each product, a worker whispered something into his ear. His eyes widened in surprise before announcing an unexpected addition to the lineup, a rare item. From the battle tribes of the barbarians at life engulfing forests, he declared, a fierce barbarian girl brought from the depths of the jungle. The girl was brought onto the stage, her presence commanding attention despite the chains binding her. The auctioneer played up her untamed nature, encouraging the crowd to bid on this wild slave and test their ability to tame her. He started the bidding at 5 million gold, but the room was silent. Undeterred, the auctioneer lowered the price to 3 million, then finally to just 1 million gold, but still, no one showed interest. The crowd began to lose focus, murmuring their disinterest. Frustrated, the auctioneer instructed the guards to remove the girl and bring out the guaranteed crowd pleasers instead. As the guards moved to take her away, the girl struggled violently, attempting to break free. But her rebellion was cut short when one of the guards struck her in the stomach, rendering her unconscious. She was dragged backstage as the auctioneer quickly apologized for the disruption. To make up for that minor incident, he announced with a flourish, "We will now present the best product of the day." The atmosphere shifted as the spotlight turned to Vikir, sitting calmly in his cage. The auctioneer described him with great enthusiasm. A pure-blood boy with striking black hair and crimson eyes, needing only the barest restraints. Before the bidding could officially begin, a woman in the crowd, clearly captivated by Vikir's beauty and physique, immediately offered 600 million gold. The auctioneer, caught off guard by her eagerness, chuckled. "We haven't even announced the starting price yet." A man in the audience followed with a bid of 800 million, which infuriated the woman. "Why would a man want him?" she snapped. "It's none of your business," the man retorted. "I plan to use him as a gladiator." The bidding intensified, with offers climbing rapidly to 900 million gold. Then, without warning, a masked bidder holding plate number 99 raised the stakes to an astounding 6 billion gold. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the masked figure. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "It's Baron Gambino from the granary," someone said. "He's been rolling in money ever since taking over the underground funds." While some admired the Baron's deep pockets, his attendant expressed concern. "That's a lot of money for a slave," she said cautiously. "You'll only profit if his body stays unscathed." The Baron, clearly irritated, lashed out at her. "I took you in when you had nothing, and now you dare question me?" His anger silenced her objections. The auctioneer slammed his hammer down. "Sold." Customer 99 wins the bid for 6 billion gold. Vikir was brought forward to stand before Baron Gambino, who examined him with greedy eyes. Up close, Vikir's appearance was even more striking, and the Baron's thoughts turned dark. "You belong to me now," he said with a twisted grin, assuring Vikir that he wasn't a bad person. "No need to be nervous," he added, though his tone and expression suggested otherwise. The Baron began speaking of the many ways he could enjoy his new purchase, his perverse gaze making Vikir visibly uncomfortable. Suddenly, Vikir raised his hands, presenting them to the Baron. The Baron, momentarily puzzled, assumed Vikir wanted him to undo the cuffs. "Oh, you want me to?" Before he could finish, Vikir effortlessly broke the handcuffs. The sound of snapping metal reverberated through the room, leaving the Baron and his attendant stunned. Without hesitation, Vikir delivered a devastating kick to Baron Gambino, sending him flying to the ground. Before the Baron could recover, Vikir grabbed him by the back and announced a game he called Spear and Shield. With an iron grip, Vikir explained the rules. He would be the spear, and the Baron, as the shield, had to endure his attack to win. The Baron writhed in pain, screaming for his attendant Cindy to save him. But before she could move, the Baron had already passed out. Vikir released his grip, declaring with a calm, yet chilling tone that the Baron's unconsciousness meant he had lost the game. Reaching up, Vikir removed his disguise, revealing his true identity as Vikir Van Baskerville. The revelation sent a wave of shock through the room. Cindy, the Baron's attendant, gasped and exclaimed his name, but Vikir paid her no attention. Instead, he crouched near the Baron, inspecting him closely. "Is he dead?" Vikir asked, his voice cold and indifferent. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief. "If Vikir Van Baskerville is here," someone questioned aloud, "then who's the new deputy consul of Underdog City?" Others whispered anxiously, wondering why a Baskerville hound would appear at an underground auction. Among the crowd, Chihuahua watched silently, his thoughts racing. "The deputy consul has turned this situation into something massive," he mused, struggling to process the chaos unfolding before him. Vikir stood tall, surveying the room. "A circus," he remarked with a menacing smile. "A fitting name for this place." His crimson eyes gleamed with malice as he added, "Don't think for a moment that anyone here will leave in one piece." The atmosphere grew tense. Vikir, standing unarmed in the middle of the auction hall, was surrounded by guards. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what would happen next. The auctioneer, seething with rage, broke the silence with a shout. "Kill him," he ordered the guards, completely disregarding Vikir's status as a Baskerville. The guards rushed at Vikir, weapons drawn. But before they could get close, Vikir's hand flickered, and Beelzebub, his blade, materialized in an instant. With frightening precision, he cut through the advancing guards effortlessly, leaving them crumpled on the floor. A chilling red aura radiated from Vikir, and the auctioneer's confidence faltered as he realized the kind of opponent they were dealing with. One guard, wielding a metal ball and chain, swung the weapon at Vikir. In a blur, Vikir dashed forward and sliced through both the chain and the guard in a single stroke. The auctioneer's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what was happening. It dawned on him with horror that Vikir was a graduate, a title bestowed upon the most elite warriors who represented a nation's ultimate strength. "We don't stand a chance," he thought, his terror growing by the second. Watching from the sidelines, Chihuahua muttered to himself, marveling at Vikir's incredible swordsmanship. "I never expected his skills to be this irregular," he admitted, awestruck. But the chaos took a sudden turn. A sinister laugh echoed through the room, drawing Vikir's attention. Turning, he saw the auctioneer holding a knife to Chihuahua's throat. "Drop your weapon and surrender," the auctioneer demanded, his voice dripping with malice, "or I'll slit his throat right here." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Vikir. Vikir stood his ground, calm and unflinching, even as the auctioneer pressed the knife closer to Chihuahua's throat. Frustrated by Vikir's composure, the auctioneer grew more agitated. Meanwhile, Chihuahua, still held hostage, spoke with surprising resolve. "I'll be fine, Deputy Consul. Don't worry about me. Take care of yourself." The auctioneer snarled, trying to silence Chihuahua, but his words only further demonstrated his loyalty to Vikir. Amused, Vikir laughed softly. "You've impressed me, Chihuahua," he said, his tone light but purposeful. Reaching down, Vikir revealed a flute attached to his leg. The auctioneer, confused, demanded to know what Vikir intended to do with it. Chihuahua, recognizing the object, wondered about its true purpose. Holding the flute confidently, Vikir stepped forward and addressed the tense room. Without warning, he placed it to his lips and blew with all his might. The piercing sound echoed through the auction hall, reverberating with such intensity that the crowd cried out in pain. Covering their ears, they tried desperately to block out the deafening noise. When the sound ceased, an eerie silence fell. The crowd exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what had just occurred. The auctioneer, seemingly unaffected, let out a nervous laugh. "Is that all? A scare tactic," he sneered. "Even a graduate can't change anything here." But before he could say more, his words were abruptly cut short. A blade pierced his throat from behind, silencing him mid-sentence. Blood sprayed as the auctioneer's head was severed from his body. His lifeless head tumbled to the ground, eyes still wide in shock. Standing behind him was a hooded figure, their presence radiating menace. Chihuahua stared at the scene, paralyzed with disbelief. A guard nearby, attempting to regain control, rushed at the hooded figure. But with a single flick of the intruder's sword, coated in a dense red aura, the guard was shredded to pieces. The remaining guards froze in terror, their fear palpable. Vikir, watching the chaos unfold, smirked in satisfaction. Suddenly, more hooded figures appeared throughout the auction hall. There were dozens of them, each exuding a chilling, powerful aura. Their cold, unrelenting gazes seemed to pierce through the souls of those who dared meet their eyes. One guard, trembling, whispered, "Oh, who are they?" Another muttered a prayer, desperate for hope. Cindy Wendy, the Baron's attendant, recognized the distinctive teeth insignia on their chests. Her face drained of color. "The Pitbull Order," she murmured, her voice quivering. "The Baskerville clan's most brutal knights, the annihilation experts." The crowd erupted into panicked whispers. Everyone knew the Pitbull Order was made up entirely of graduates, warriors who represented the pinnacle of strength. Before Cindy could react further, one of the knights appeared behind her, sword poised to strike. Her heart raced as she thought, "I can't die here, not like this." But just as the blade was about to fall, Vikir stepped in, stopping the knight with a commanding presence. "Leave her alive," he ordered. The knight immediately backed off and knelt, showing deference to Vikir. "Rip the rest of them to shreds," Vikir commanded coldly. "But don't kill those lying down obediently. If they so much as flinch, kill them without hesitation." The knight nodded and vanished with terrifying speed, disappearing into the shadows. The hall descended into chaos as the Pitbull Knights carried out Vikir's orders with ruthless efficiency. The cries of those being cut down echoed throughout the area, their pleas for mercy drowned out by the sound of blades tearing through flesh. Among the survivors, a man lying prone on the ground trembled in fear. "Don't move. Don't even breathe," he thought. "Just stay down, and maybe I'll survive this." A Pitbull Knight appeared in front of a trembling man lying on the ground. The man squealed in terror, begging for mercy. "I'll wear the cuffs. I'll do whatever you want," he cried. The knight stared down coldly. "We don't carry cuffs," he replied bluntly. Confused, the man stammered, "Then what will happen to me?" Without another word, the knight's blade flashed. The man screamed in agony as his legs were severed. "Those sentenced to execution don't need legs," the knight said emotionlessly before moving on, leaving the man writhing in pain. Nearby, a man with a cigar stood beside Vikir. It was Boston Terrier Le Baskerville, commander of the Pitbull Knights. He glanced at Vikir, his gaze appraising, and asked, "How are you finding the Pitbull Knights? Satisfied with their performance?" Vikir nodded. "They're effective." Smirking, Boston Terrier offered further assistance. "If there's anything else you need, just say the word." Taking a long drag from his cigar, Boston Terrier studied Vikir more closely. No wonder Brother Hugo is so interested in him, he thought. At just 15, he's already this fierce and cruel. Placing a hand on Vikir's head, Boston Terrier invited him to join the Pitbull Knights. "Come to us," he said with a grin. "I'll raise you properly." Vikir hesitated before replying. "I'll think about it." Then, excusing himself, he added, "There's an urgent matter I need to handle." Boston Terrier watched him leave, a slight frown crossing his face. "He's ignoring me," Boston Terrier thought, but instead of feeling insulted, it only deepened his resolve. "I want him even more now." Vikir made his way to a dimly lit storeroom. His sharp eyes scanned the area as he muttered to himself, It has to be here somewhere, he said, searching purposefully. His gaze landed on a large safe tucked in the corner. Approaching it, he wondered if it held the payments from the nobles. For a moment, he considered taking the money to City Hall for taxation, but dismissed the thought. That's not why I'm here, he murmured. Turning his attention away from the safe, Vakir spotted a cage nearby, draped with a cloth. His expression hardened with determination as he approached it. Pulling off the cloth, he revealed a battered and bruised girl lying inside. The girl's body bore visible signs of torment, and tears streaked her face as she whimpered softly. Vakir clicked his tongue in disapproval, reaching into his pack to retrieve a potion. You're lucky enough to get this, he muttered. The potion, a gift from the Pitbull Knights, had extraordinary healing properties. Vakir poured it carefully into the girl's mouth. Almost instantly, her wounds began to mend, and the bruises on her body faded. The girl's eyes fluttered open, but upon seeing Vakir, she recoiled in fear. Perplexed, Vakir asked, "Why are you so afraid?" She didn't respond, only staring at him with confusion and caution. Rising to his feet, Vakir unlocked the cage door. Speaking in halting barbarian, he ordered her to leave. The girl seemed to understand but continued to look at him, hesitant. Vakir thought back to his battles with barbarians before his regression, where he had picked up some basics of their language. Pointing to the exit, he repeated his command in barbarian. Run away. The girl spoke something in her native tongue, her tone soft but incomprehensible to Vakir. He admitted, I'm not fluent in your language. As she turned to leave, the girl paused at the doorway and looked back at him. She spoke again in barbarian, her voice carrying an emotional weight Vakir couldn't decipher. Though he didn't understand the words, Vakir concluded from her tone and expression that she was thanking him. Vakir removed another cloth, revealing the true reason he had come to the storage area, Mercy Lego's corpse. Stepping closer, he examined the A-rank monster's remains with satisfaction, pleased to see it was still intact. A red aura began to radiate from his hand, and Beelzebub emerged with a faint grin, exuding a sinister presence. It's been a while since you've feasted on an A-rank monster, Vakir said to Beelzebub, his tone almost conversational. You'll get your meal soon, but you need to finish quickly. The Pitbull order is due to arrive shortly. Beelzebub responded with an eager, pleased sound, expressing its gratitude for the extraordinary feast it was about to enjoy. As the sun rose, news of the new deputy consul's ruthless actions against the criminal underworld spread like wildfire. Whispers circulated that the nobles and others involved in the illegal slave auction were now prisoners, their limbs torn off, held in Underdog City's prison. The notorious club Burning Suspension, once a den for illicit activities, had been burned to the ground, reduced to ashes. Heads of the club's VIPs were displayed publicly, creating a chilling warning against criminal behavior. The 7 original clans, whose heirs had been among those executed, sent written protests to the administrative office. Vakir's reply was blunt and unwavering. The death penalty was the only fitting punishment for those involved in the imperial family's most forbidden act, illegal slave trading. Bank drafts, ledgers, and incriminating documents from Burning Suspension were seized and turned over to the Baskerville clan for investigation. These records detailed cash transactions and financial ties to criminal organizations, all of which were being prepared for a formal report to the imperial family. With such decisive action, the protests from the 7 families eventually ceased. In an unprecedented move, the patriarchs of the 7 clans came personally to plead with Vakir at the administrative office. Their desperation was palpable as they sought leniency for their families. Vakir's response was simple and final. The Black Ledgers from Burning Suspension have been investigated. In accordance with the Baskerville Self-Governing Dominion, the assets of your families will be confiscated, and for the crime of treason, 3 generations of your bloodlines will be destroyed. The impact of Vakir's appointment as deputy consul was felt across Underdog City. The execution grounds ran red with the blood of the city's corrupt elite, wiping out its most vile elements. Public officials and contractors, now free from the criminal influence, required new manpower, which led to a decrease in unemployment. The collapse of the underground auction house resulted in a surge in tax revenue, improving the city's welfare and revitalizing its economy. Underdog City began to see daily improvements, and Vakir's popularity among the citizens soared. Even the market reflected this shift as local businesses thrived and stock prices climbed. One day, Chihuahua approached Vakir in the administrative office, holding a steaming coffee cup. I brought you some coffee, he said, smiling. Vakir looked up and waved dismissively. You don't need to do that. You're the office manager, not a servant. Chihuahua shook his head, his tone warm. It's just my way of thanking you for saving me back at the auction. That clown nearly stabbed me. Vakir chuckled, a rare smile gracing his face. Coffee, huh? That's a bit stingy for someone whose life I saved. Chihuahua laughed and replied, I put in 2 spoons of sugar, creamer, and just a little bit of water. Consider it premium. The two shared a moment of levity before Chihuahua shifted the topic. By the way, how's your transcribing training coming along? Vakir handed over a sheet of paper. Take a look for yourself. Chihuahua examined the paper and was genuinely surprised. You've only been learning to write for a short time, but this is amazing. Your handwriting is almost flawless. Vakir humbly admitted that he still had much to learn, praising Chihuahua for his skills as office manager. Chihuahua, on the other hand, thought to himself how remarkable Vakir was. The young deputy consul not only had the ability to create and enforce new laws, but also grasped their deeper implications with ease. Chihuahua believed that if Vakir stayed in Underdog City, its development would flourish like never before. In the stillness of the night, faint rays of moonlight pierced through the clouded sky and spilled into a prison cell. Inside, Vakir stood face-to-face with a prisoner, Cindy Wendy, Baron Gambino's former attendant, whom he had spared during the slave auction. Cindy was bound with handcuffs, a blindfold covering her eyes. Vakir broke the silence, apologizing for not visiting her sooner and explaining that his duties had kept him occupied. He asked her a question to confirm her identity. Your name is Cindy Wendy, isn't it? She didn't respond to his question, instead asking coldly why he had spared her life. Without answering, Vakir reached forward and removed the blindfold from her eyes. Meeting her gaze, he replied, because I had questions for you. Cindy's expression twisted with disdain. Is that the only reason you kept me alive? She asked, her voice dripping with bitterness. Vakir ignored the question and turned away, his voice calm yet deliberate. Baron Gambino's rise in power wasn't natural. He was just an ordinary man before, but he climbed the ranks rapidly because of you, your ability to generate wealth. If you had nurtured your talents in a legitimate environment, you could have been a great merchant or banker. Pulling a chair in front of her, Vakir sat down. I'll make you a deal, he said. Answer my questions honestly, and I'll release you. If you refuse, his tone darkened, leaving the consequences unspoken. Cindy bit her lip in anger, but eventually agreed to answer as best as she could. Vakir's first question was blunt. How do you evaluate my performance as a law enforcer? Cindy responded with a mocking smile. Oh, a reputable magistrate has graced Underdog City with his presence, she said sarcastically. Unimpressed, Vakir leaned back. If you don't take me seriously, I can't promise to keep my word. With a sigh of annoyance, Cindy relented. Fine, I think you're doing well. Vakir's gaze turned cold and calculating. Suddenly, his expression shifted into a grin. Rising from his chair, he strode towards Cindy, grabbing her chin and leaning in close. His red eyes glinted as he asked in a deep, unsettling voice, why do you think I'm doing well? Cindy broke into a cold sweat under his piercing gaze. Vakir released her and walked back to his chair, gesturing for her to speak freely. Grinding her teeth, Cindy began to explain. She pointed out that as a consul, virtue was one of the most important principles to uphold. While Vakir's strict laws may eliminate street criminals and bolster his personal authority, they would also sow seeds of resentment. Over time, hatred and rage among the people would grow, causing more harm than good. Looking directly at Vakir, Cindy warned him, if you keep gaining power like this, the Baskerville clan won't tolerate you. They'll see you as a threat to the clan leader. Vakir listened carefully, his expression unreadable. He concluded from Cindy's words that his current path could lead to both the people's hatred and the Baskerville clan turning against him. What do you think I should do? He asked. Cindy met his gaze and replied, return all your authority and the glory of your achievements here to the Baskerville clan and its leader. If you keep the spotlight on yourself, it'll only bring more trouble. She paused, then added, go somewhere where your power and status won't stand out. Places like Life Engulfing Forest or the Imperial Academy. Among people your age and rank, you can hide your strength and erase your identity from the spotlight. Cindy assured Vakir that in time, the Baskerville clan leader would bear the consequences in his stead. After hearing her advice, Vakir remained silent, his gaze distant. The stillness was abruptly shattered as Cindy felt an intense surge of bloodlust emanating from him. A shiver ran down her spine, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken menace. Breaking the silence, Vakir finally spoke, his voice calm but chilling. I understand your suggestion, he said. It's like asking a hunting dog to bite the neck of its own master. His crimson eyes bore into Cindy with a mix of bloodlust and killing intent, waiting for her reaction. Yet, Cindy met his gaze without flinching, her expression calm. It's the only way for you to avoid the Baskerville clan's hatred, she replied evenly. Vakir's lips curled into a faint smile. I'll keep your advice in mind, he said. It's remarkable. Your thoughts are almost identical to mine. To Cindy's astonishment, Vakir stepped forward and removed her handcuffs, setting her free. Cindy stared at him, bewildered. You're really letting me go? Vakir nodded. I always keep my promises. As Cindy walked past him, she paused and said, I hope you never come to regret this. Before she could leave, Vakir's voice stopped her. Do you know the Messamidinaro clan? Cindy turned back, her expression puzzled. Vakir began to narrate. There were more than just the well-known 7 clans among Underdog City's founding families, he explained. The Messamidinaro clan was the 8th, a prosperous merchant clan that rivaled the others in wealth and influence. He continued, his tone darkening. Their prosperity came to an abrupt end during a birthday celebration. The youngest son of the clan displayed his newly learned sword skills. What he showed stunned the onlookers. It was the secret Baskerville sword technique, knowledge that only members of the Baskerville family are permitted to know. The revelation reached the Baskerville clan's leader, who immediately deemed it an unforgivable breach of military secrecy. The response was swift and merciless. The hunting dogs were unleashed, and the Messamidinaro clan was wiped out. Cindy's expression grew tense, and she asked cautiously. Vakir's voice turned sharp. There was more to the story. The secret sword technique hadn't been leaked by accident. It was stolen by the 7 clans' young masters and taught to the child as a cruel trick. The Messamidinaro clan was nothing more than a scapegoat for their crime. Cindy forced a smile, her unease growing. What does the story of the 8th clan have to do with me? Vakir didn't answer directly. There was a survivor, he revealed, his tone heavy with meaning. A 1-year-old girl taken from the wreckage of her family's massacre. She was subjected to unspeakable cruelty, tortured simply because she was beautiful. What they did to her, he paused, the weight of the story too grim for even him to elaborate. Cindy clenched her fists and turned away, anger flashing across her face. I don't want to hear any more of this, she snapped, walking toward the exit. But Vakir's voice pursued her. The story doesn't end there, he said. A new deputy consul brought the truth to light and exacted justice. The 7 masters who orchestrated the Messamidinaro clan's fall were captured, tortured, and forced to admit their crimes. Vakir's expression darkened. Before they died, they expressed remorse. Their last words were, I'm sorry for committing such a heinous crime. Cindy stopped in her tracks, tears streaming down her face. Turning back to face Vakir, she choked out a question. Who? Who were they apologizing to? Vakir looked at Cindy with calm resolve and answered. They should apologize to the young girl who used the fake name Cindy Wendy, the sole survivor of the Messamidinaro clan. Cindy's tears continued to flow as she stared at him, her voice trembling. How am I supposed to believe you? She asked. You took them, tortured them. How can I trust they truly apologized? Without hesitation, Vakir picked up a torch. The easiest way for you to believe me, he said evenly, is to see it with your own eyes. He led Cindy to the prison cell where the 7 young masters had been held before their executions. Gesturing toward the floor, he urged her to take a look. Cindy's eyes widened as she took in the sight. Written in blood on the ground were the prisoners' final, desperate words of apology. We were the ones who brought devastation upon the Messamidinaro clan. Forgive us for our crimes. The message was a pitiful plea for mercy, born from terror in their last moments. Overwhelmed by the gruesome scene, Cindy clutched her stomach and vomited. Tears streamed down her face as she trembled. Vakir approached her, his voice steady. Even though they all died painful deaths, the vengeance of the Messamidinaro clan isn't over yet. There's still one more clan that needs to answer for what they've done. He knelt slightly to meet Cindy's gaze. Despise the Baskervilles. You have more than enough right to do so. As a survivor of the Messamidinaro clan, Cindy wiped her mouth, her tears refusing to stop. Why are you helping me? She asked, her voice raw. You're part of the Baskerville clan yourself. Vakir smirked faintly, his crimson eyes glinting. You're asking the wrong question. Cindy got to her feet, brushing herself off. She began to walk away, but paused, turning back to face him. I understand now, she said softly. Vakir Van Baskerville, I owe you a debt. Her tone shifted, firm with resolve. No matter what you choose to do with your life, I'll make sure you never have to worry about money again. As she disappeared down the hallway, Vakir stood in silence, watching her go. After a moment, he muttered to himself, I'll hold you to that promise. The next morning, Chihuahua burst into Vakir's personal quarters, eager to wake him up for work. Deputy Consul, it's time to, he began, but the words died in his throat. The sight before him was surreal. Vakir lay peacefully sleeping amidst blood-soaked sheets, with corpses scattered across the room. Vikir stirred, rubbing his eyes. He greeted Chihuahua with a casual, "Good morning." Chihuahua's jaw dropped. "Good morning," he exclaimed. "What about the bodies all over the place?" Vikir glanced lazily around the room and shrugged. "I'm not sure. It seems I killed them in my sleep." Chihuahua stared at him, horrified. "Are you serious?" Vikir laughed lightly. "Relax. It was just a joke." As they walked down the hallway, Chihuahua hesitated before asking, "Deputy Consul, what was your childhood like?" Vikir smirked. "Didn't find my earlier joke funny?" "That's not what I meant," Chihuahua replied, exasperated. Vikir's expression turned thoughtful as he muttered aloud, "Lately, I've had some inconveniences. 2 poison arrows for poison drinks, acid snipers, arson attacks, getting run over by a cart." The list goes on. Scratching his ear, he asked, "Do you think I've attracted someone's attention?" Chihuahua stared at him incredulously. "I think you've gone insane." Vikir's focus shifted as he contemplated Beelzebub, the weapon summoned from his arm. He thought about its newest skill, Hellish Buffalo's Tough Life, which he had obtained at the last illegal auction. Though it carried a high risk rating, its effectiveness had exceeded his expectations. With Beelzebub's 3 slots filled by Burn Injury Cerberus, Hemorrhage Hellhound, and Tough Life Hellish Buffalo, Vikir's body was now significantly enhanced. The River Styx's enhancements, combined with Tough Life, had made his skin so resilient that even a graduate-class assassin had been unable to pierce it. Despite his satisfaction with the power of his skills, the continued attempts on his life had started to become more than just an annoyance for Vikir. He knew he needed to investigate and put an end to the assassination attempts. Chihuahua smiled nervously, agreeing with his decision. As the two walked, they noticed a carriage ahead. The flag emblazoned on it was unmistakable. It bore the Baskerville crest. Both of them expressed surprise at the sight. "They've sent someone from the main family," Vikir said, his tone serious. The carriage door opened, and a figure began to descend. Chihuahua immediately started to sweat profusely. Standing stiffly at attention, he nervously wondered if this was who he thought it was. Vikir, on the other hand, remained calm, watching the guest with measured eyes. The new arrival was none other than John Barrymore, the head butler of the Baskerville household. John greeted Vikir with a warm smile. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Vikir inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the greeting. "You're looking much better these days, head butler," he remarked politely. The butler chuckled lightly as he approached. "Do you really think so?" he replied playfully. "I had no doubts that you'd do well ever since you left the main residence." "Just luck," Vikir said modestly, though his composed demeanor betrayed little emotion. Chihuahua, standing nearby, couldn't contain his awe. The head butler, John Barrymore, wasn't just any servant. He was the best of the Barrymore family, having served the notoriously terrifying Baskerville family for 4 generations. For Chihuahua, being in his presence was like meeting a living legend. Vikir interrupted Chihuahua's starstruck thoughts with a direct question. "What brings you all the way here, head butler?" John's smile remained as he explained. "The Patriarch has been following your progress closely and is quite pleased. He's ordered you to return to the main residence." Vikir blinked, momentarily surprised. "Hugo is pleased?" he repeated internally, struggling to imagine such a scenario. He pictured his uncle Hugo with a smiling face, but the thought seemed almost too absurd to be real. Meanwhile, at the Baskerville residence, Hugo La Baskerville, the clan patriarch, sat at his desk, reading an article with an unusual title. "The most beloved figure among underdog citizens, Vikir." The article detailed how Vikir had become the recipient of multiple awards, including most trusted among merchants, most loved among farmers, most respected among children and scholars, most targeted by assassins. Hugo's sharp eyes flicked over the page before glancing up at Vikir. "The Baskervilles have always been known for using weapons, not brains," he remarked bluntly. "But with your actions, we can change that image." Hugo nodded approvingly. "You've done well, Vikir." Vikir bowed humbly, placing a hand over his chest. "I only did what I was supposed to do." Yet, he couldn't help but silently question whether the expression on Hugo's face was genuinely happiness or something else entirely. Hugo continued in a commanding tone. "One must reward and punish according to the situation." He paused, then added, "You will be attending the Colosio Academy this year." Vikir, ever composed, merely nodded. He had anticipated this. The Colosio Academy was renowned as the Empire's finest institution, catering exclusively to the children of aristocracy and royalty. With its strict dormitory system and unparalleled internal security, it was the ideal training ground for the Empire's elite. To Vakir, this was a golden opportunity, not only to grow stronger, but also to subtly distance himself from Hugo's ever-watchful eyes. As Hugo continued, he mentioned his intention to send additional companions with Vakir to the academy, but admitted he hadn't yet decided who they would be. He then asked Vakir directly if there were any siblings he would prefer to attend with. Vakir responded that he was closest to Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough, though inwardly, he thought of them more as convenient sandbags. Hugo, seemingly satisfied with the choice, agreed to send those three along. He then asked Vakir if he remembered the plan they had devised when Vakir was just 8 years old. Vakir immediately guessed Hugo was referring to the strategy they had discussed during joint training with the Morgs. "You mean the plan to lend the ruby mines to the Morgs family and use them to wipe out the barbarians?" Hugo smirked. "That's the one. And it worked." Curious, Vakir pressed for clarification. Hugo explained that the Morgs had proposed a joint raid and approached the Baskervilles humbly, offering a partnership that was already showing promising results. Switching topics, Hugo suggested that before entering the academy, Vakir should conduct a territory inspection to ensure that the laws he had implemented were being upheld. "It'll be a good experience for you," Hugo added. Bowing his head, Vakir agreed. "I'll follow your orders, Patriarch." Soon, Vakir and Chihuahua stood at the city gates, preparing for Vakir's departure. With tears in his eyes, Chihuahua waved goodbye, addressing him formally. "Deputy Consul, I'll do my best to manage the administrative work while you're away." Vakir turned back to glance at the teary-eyed secretary and thought to himself that this parting would likely be permanent. As Vakir and his group traveled some distance from the city, he abruptly called out, instructing someone to reveal themselves. In response, dozens of figures dressed in black emerged from hiding spots all around the group. One of them even appeared beside Vakir, removing his head covering to reveal himself. The man introduced himself as Staffordshire Baskerville, a knight of the Pitbull Order. Vakir greeted him and apologized for the wait, explaining that he wanted their departure to proceed in an orderly fashion. Staffordshire assured Vakir that their mission was to safely escort him to the Morgs family's juvenile fortress. "Any updates on my Uncle Boston Terrier?" Vakir asked. Staffordshire chuckled. "He's doing well. But ever since the slave auction incident, he's been adamant about recruiting you into the Pitbull Order." Vakir smirked slightly, but thought to himself how uncomfortable his uncle's obsession made him. The group eventually arrived in a hilly region, where they observed farmers diligently working in the fields. Vakir pointed toward the farmland. "Is this the region we lent to the Morgs?" he asked. Staffordshire nodded. "It is. It doesn't look like anyone's breaking the law here." Vakir's sharp gaze swept across the scene, but he remained quiet. He knew the stated purpose of the envoy team was territory inspection, but their true mission was to eliminate the barbarians. Staffordshire continued, informing Vakir that the Morgs family had assembled a substantial force. 3 delegates, 30 members of the lower house parliament, and about 100 mages unaffiliated with the legislature. Vakir noted the effort and remarked inwardly that the Baskervilles, in contrast, had sent only a dozen knights and himself, a lone member of the lower house parliament, while the elite forces were stationed on standby beyond the mountains. He recalled Hugo's words of advice before his departure. "It wouldn't be a bad idea to observe the barbarians' lifestyle for yourself." As Vakir and Staffordshire continued their journey, a fortress came into view in the distance. The sight around it was grim. Dead trees dotted the landscape, and skeletons hung from their branches like eerie decorations. Vakir observed the scene and remarked to Staffordshire, "A mage must have done this. It's clearly meant as a message to the barbarians from the Morgs." Staffordshire nodded, shuddering slightly. "It's a terrifying warning." But Vakir's mind wandered to Camus Morgs, wondering how much she had changed and grown since their last meeting. As they approached the fortress gates, 3 figures appeared above them. A stern voice called out, demanding to know who they were. Vakir and Staffordshire looked up in surprise. Standing atop the gates were 3 identical girls, all wearing expressions of equal defiance. One of them spoke confidently, declaring, "No one passes without our permission." The other 2 immediately echoed her words in perfect unison. Vakir instantly recognized them as the Morgs family's infamous 3 flowers, the triplets High Sis, Middle Sis, and Low Sis. Their reputation for chaos and madness was well known, with people often saying that their combined insanity could reach the heavens. Steeling himself, Vakir introduced himself as part of the Baskerville envoy team sent to inspect the territory and strengthen relations. His voice was firm as he demanded the gates be opened. High Sis, however, refused. I need to report to the person in charge first, she said. You'll get your response tomorrow. Vakir frowned, irritation flickering across his face. You're denying me entry into my own land? The triplet smirked. Tenant protection law, High Sis retorted smugly. Don't look down on us just because we're renters here. That law, it was made by your family. Her mocking tone made Vakir's temple throb with annoyance. He felt a familiar red aura beginning to flicker around his hand as his irritation grew. For a moment, his anger threatened to boil over, but he took a deep breath and managed to suppress it. Keeping his voice calm, Vakir responded, I've amended the law. It now allows me to evict tenants I dislike. His words were icy as he reiterated his demand. Open the gates. Now. A wave of killing intent surged from Vakir, slamming into the triplets with a force that made them falter. Fear flickered in their eyes as they hesitated, caught off guard by the bloodlust emanating from him. But the tension reached a breaking point when High Sis, unable to contain her anger, cast a spell at Vakir. I've heard about the psycho kid running Underdog City, she sneered, but we've dealt with enough lunatics to know how to handle you. The spell struck the ground near Vakir, causing his horse to rear in fright. From her vantage point, Low Sis shouted again. You'll wait right there. Don't step foot onto Morg's territory without permission. Her insults grew sharper. Stupid swordsman. You think you can handle us? I'd love to test the so-called rising star of the Baskerville family. Staffordshire instinctively drew his sword, his expression dark. This won't end with words, he said grimly. Vakir agreed, signaling his readiness to fight. But before they could act, one of their group members shouted angrily. These girls don't even know their place. Two others echoed his sentiment, their voices full of disdain. Their words are absurd. The familiarity of their voices caught Vakir's attention. He glanced toward his companions, his thoughts churning. Those voices, I've heard them before. The three sisters, unfazed by the outburst, exchanged amused glances. High Sis was the first to speak, her tone condescending. Mere underlings, she scoffed. Middle Sis chimed in, smirking. Do you think your ranks are higher than ours? Low Sis finished, her voice dripping with disdain. You don't even know your place. The three members of Vakir's group stepped forward to confront Morgs's three flowers, firmly denying their accusations by repeatedly saying, Not us. Removing their hoods, they revealed their identities. It was none other than the Baskerville triplets, High Burrow, Middle Burrow, and Low Burrow. Standing confidently, they pointed at Vakir and declared in unison, He is the symbol of Baskerville. The triplets turned to Vakir with matching grins. Leave this to us, they assured him, radiating confidence. Vakir's expression twisted into one of exasperation. Great. My annoyance has just increased to the power of 2, he muttered to himself.